Good afternoon, everyone. This is a Prescott City Council workshop meeting. Today is Tuesday, May 17th. It's 1 p.m. Can we have roll call, please?
Mayor Good.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Rusing.
Here.
Councilman Montoya.
Here.
Councilman Sischka.
Here.
Councilman Tenney.
Here.
And the record will reflect that Councilman Moore is excused from the meeting, and I will notate when Councilwoman Hall arrives.
Very good. So we will start this off with a discussion of the fiscal 2023 budget. So Mark Woodfill, our finance director, it's good to see you this afternoon.
Thank you, sir. And thank you. We'll get started. We have a lot of exciting, interesting things to go over today.
Fantastic.
That wasn't the joke, so the budget process this year started back in January 4th when council got together and did the strategic planning. It gave all the departments kind of a framework of where you wanted to see us moving. And from there, it took the format as described in the city charter and state law, actually, where the departments work with the city manager and we form a budget over the next several months, and then we bring a budget to the council to achieve those goals within the resources that we estimate will be available. So that's where we are today at our first council workshop, budget workshop on May 17th. So I'm sure you all read my email I sent about 12 days ago about the operating budget being out on the website, and this is our website that's out to the public and where I directed you. The operating budget has been out here, all 324 pages of it. And again, I apologize, but the whole city account structure is over 8,000 lines, so there is a lot of detail. We tried to summarize it to make it as useful as possible. Other documents out there I hope you've had a chance to look at is the capital book, which is the current year that we're budgeting, FY23, and 5 additional years of capital needs that the departments have brought forward for you to know the needs are coming, for you to be aware of for discussion purposes. So since that stuff was out there, today's slides are also out there for those who were unable to fit in the room. As you can see, we have a full house today. The workshop today is going to focus more on a summary level, on a higher level. Our capital presentations will look more on next year as opposed to the other 5 years, although we do have 5-year information in the presentation as we go. And of course, as council desires as we go through, if we need more clarity, we can go to the full 6-year capital book presentations to answer questions. We have a follow-up meeting scheduled for May 31st if necessary. If there's other things that we don't cover today, or if we don't get through it all today, or other stuff that council wants to discuss, we can do another workshop on May 31st. If that is the desire, we figure that out at the end, I guess. And of course, if there's something that doesn't need a workshop, but you just have additional questions, or if the public out there has additional questions, they can always call us, set up an appointment. We'd be glad to sit down and go into whatever level of detail anybody would like to on the budget. So budget summary, just to kind of summarize some of the key points as we go through it. Last year, we adopted a market compensation plan. During the goals retreat, it was one of your top priorities to maintain that compensation plan. As we look at the CPI, it is at 5%, and this is using the same CPI that we used in the past. I'm going to jump to that slide because Councilman Montoya had a question on it. We use the Phoenix area annual numbers, which is the full calendar year, year to year. Last year we gave it 2% because that's what it was. This year we're looking at a 5%. So what does a 5% CPI mean in our new pay structure is that all the employees that are in ranges will move, that whole range will move 5%, and so will the employees' pay. So the top end of the range moves as well as the bottom end of the range.
Councilman Montoya.
Hi, Mark.
Hey.
So just to clarify, so if someone is in the middle of the range,
Yes,
their pay doesn't necessarily go up, the
Yes, it
range?
does.
Oh, it does, okay.
yes,
So their pay goes up and the range goes up as well?
yes.
Okay,
Right, so if you're at the top of the range moves as well. We have very broad ranges with our new pay plan. But yes, the CPI, the change in the Consumer Price Index, everybody gets that. Not everybody, all the people that are in the graded system get that first part of July, when the fiscal year starts. We line up with the pay periods, but it's generally there. The 45 employees that are in open ranges, or the leadership team, which are managers and department head levels, do not automatically get the CPI. They will get a 0 to 7% adjustment based on performance. The others who get the 5%, there's a 0 to 2% performance merit that they will be eligible for on their review dates.
and what is the timing of those review dates, or does it vary?
It varies for the people that are in the pay plan. The leadership team's review date is all July 1.
Okay, thank you.
Another question that Councilman Montoya had, so I'm sure others have it as well. How does it compare? Prescott Valley this year is doing a 4% COLA and up to a 3% merit, so their total is 7, the same as ours. Yavapai County is doing a 3.5% COLA, but they are also in the middle of a compensation study and are looking at raising everybody's rate as well. So they will probably be over that 7% by the time they get done with everything. And as I said, 45 people in the open range, or 45 positions, and 479 are in the graded range. There are positions in this budget. Unlike past years, we actually have quite a few positions. We're going to go through them. 4 of them are long-time temporary positions that were made permanent. This is something we've been trying to do over the last few years. We look at our temporary positions and see if they've been around for a couple of years, and it's a service level we need. You can't really get rid of them. We shouldn't be calling them temp employees. We should make them permanent. The only additional cost of making a long-term temp employee permanent is honestly the PTO and holidays, because they already get sick leave, they already get insurance, they already get state retirement. All those things are already happening. So it's just a matter of acknowledging that it's a real need, it's a real position. And then there's 23.75 new positions, 8 of which hopefully will be in a grant. I don't think we know yet if it is a grant. If it's not a grant, we're going to have to figure that one out, because there's probably still some level of a need that we're going to have to look at there. Also, a lot of public safety expenditures as we start looking at the capital and going through this budget. Also the positions. There's also needed increases from inflation. Apparently that's a thing this year again. We do have a little inflation. We have some concern about rising energy costs. And we have a real significant capital budget this year, on $24.5 million, addressing a lot of things, and including the continuation of cleaning up our vehicle and the replacement program, which we'll also go into a little more detail. So the 4 positions, get those out of the way. Property and evidence tech has been temporary for a while. It's a position PD needs, so we made it permanent. Facilities maintenance tech, part maintenance tech, and a fleet mechanic all meet that requirement. New positions, 23.75, 20.5 of those are really public safety related. We have the 8 SAFER grant. Hopefully we will get that and be able to have 8 firefighters, EMTs. They always need things in sets of 3, so we added an additional one from the general fund so they could have the 3 divisible by 3.
Mark, I want to ask you and really all of the department heads, whenever we're doing a workshop like this in the public, I would ask you to not use acronyms. Let's spell that out so the public and others that are viewing our deliberations here understand what they mean.
Okay. The EMT? Is that what
Safer, I
you're...
think is.
Oh, SAFER?
SAFER.
Yeah.
Got you on the spot there, huh?
Yeah, I believe it's staffing. I'll look it up.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll come back to that one.
You proved my point. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Councilman Montoya?
Mark, I just have a question just to check for my own understanding, make sure I'm following along correctly. So you referenced 8 grant positions, 8 FTEs that were grant funded. Are those 8 safer grant?
Yes,
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm,
hopefully.
hopefully.
And again, oh, she gave me something really small to read. Staffing for adequate fire and emergency response, safer.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Good to know. So those are the 8 grant positions. And I guess my question to you is if in the event that we don't receive that grant to cover those costs, is there a contingency within this budget to pay for those positions?
If we do not receive that grant, which we should know by tentative adoption, which is in June, we will come back to you with some level of an option. I doubt it will be 8. As you see, as we get into there just isn't that much capacity in this budget. But there is a staffing need, so we do need to address it. So hopefully we'll get the grant and it won't be an issue, but if not, before the budget goes to tentative adoption, we will hopefully have a status report on that for you.
And just to ask a follow-up question on some of these public safety positions, when I've talked to Chief Bonnie and Holger a little bit, probably more Chief Light prior to him, I know there's some recruiting challenges. Do we think that it's reasonable that we'll be able to stand up this many police officers and firefighters in this fiscal year?
I believe they all felt it was.
They've assured us that they're going to do everything humanly possible to fill these jobs.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I understand the need exists, but it's one thing to have a need, but it's another thing to actually get the bodies in place.
It's a question we asked during the process.
Yeah, and again, I mean, obviously they'll try, and if they do, they do. If they don't, the monies don't get spent and would be available for capital and other things next year as we get into next year's budget for those in the general fund. Public safety, also there's 5 dispatchers that are shared with our partners in the Prescott Regional Communications Center. All right, I got one. And a dispatch supervisor, which is also shared with our partners. And then police has a half position for administrative specialist, and IT has a specialist too, which primary focus will be public safety, I believe.
Mayor.
Oh, yeah. Councilman Tenney.
Sorry, I know if we stop and get in the weeds on every single bullet point, the 4 hours that we have planned for this will be inadequate, so I will do this as little as possible. However, tell me about the grant term. If we're bringing on potentially as many as 8 folks, I'm hopeful that that's a long-term grant, and if not, I'm confident there's some contingency plan for scaling back by 8 or more personnel when the grant expires.
Chief, address that, go.
Yeah, the initial grant term is for 3 years, but there are contingencies to renew that grant, obviously, which would be the fiduciary responsible thing to do, so.
Okay, great, thank you. And Councilman Tenney, dissimilar to other safer, I guess now it's okay to use it since we've already signed to that. There is no requirement to retain past the 3 years.
Councilman Tenney, don't feel that you have to not ask as many questions as you need to ask. This is a very substantial budget. It's very complex, and being able to have a thorough understanding of what our obligations here is something I strongly encourage. So that's why we even scheduled a secondary time for a future meeting if we don't get through this. So I don't want to have anybody feel that they have to rush through it.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, definitely. We want questions. Never upset us with questions. There's a golf course maintenance superintendent, which is needed to improve the conditions of the course. Equipment operating in solid waste because of the difficulty of maintaining those trash truck drivers and the turnover we have there and being able to meet the needs out there. There's a deputy finance director, which is a position that we used to have. It was eliminated, redone, as we were unable to find people qualified to do it. But it is a position I felt strongly this year we need to bring back as a way to have some ongoing consistency in the department as department heads age and get less useful. We need to be able to have that backup. And also, about 10 years ago, the city manager at the time decided that purchasing was not an important aspect of what we do and eliminated our purchasing department, moving all those duties into finance with no positions, of course. And it put us more in a catch the mistakes issue as opposed to helping resolve the issues up front. So with the additional person, we'll also be able to put more emphasis on helping departments with the purchasing process, not having to fix problems once they happen, and be able to move things a little bit forward. Not talking about a full-fledged centralized purchasing, but definitely assistance for the departments that need it. Departments like Public Works do a lot of procurement that's unique, and they do a lot of that themselves, but other departments, procurement is not a major part of what they do, and we want to be able to be there to help them with it. And this will give us the manpower to do it, as well as give you a succession plan for an aging finance director.
So you're not talking about depreciation?
No.
Okay.
The administrative support specialist is to bring that position in the city council offices to full-time. It is currently 3/4, but she is working full-time. With that,
I have a question.
yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Out of all the departments, I see that we don't have any requests from the airport for any new positions.
There were some requests for reclassifications, which we worked through with the airport in the process.
Okay, because we got a lot of exciting things going on there. Okay, thank you.
So in fiscal year 2008, we had 571 employees. With these additional employees this year, we will be up to 548. So we're still well below where we were in the past, but there are needs. It is a growing city. We need to keep providing services.
Mark, on that point a little bit, I guess my question is, are we operating with adequate staffing across our departments, specifically within the context of public safety? Like it sounds like we're adding a number of folks to the firefighters. That's great, and police, and I'm hopeful that recruitment will be successful. But are we running a risk of having burnout, low morale by pushing too low on our staffing?
Councilman Matoy, I'll address it and allow Holger and Amy to come up and view their perspective as well. I think the positions that are being added are going to fulfill the needs that they have at this juncture. There wasn't anything from a cop or firefighter perspective that we said no to.
There were 5 requests.
Yeah, so thank you. I would agree with that, and to your point, Councilman, the situation that we run into with recruiting is if we ask for really what would bring us up to that level, I don't know that we could fill it. And so what we're taking is a really measured approach to what we see as a need for additional growth and additional support in conjunction with the other city leadership and what we know we can support.
So it sounds like you have confidence that with these requests that you'll be able to fill these positions within this fiscal year?
I have hope. Yeah, we have a very active recruiting team. We're getting as creative as we possibly can to find the right people. What I'm committed to for our department and for our community is not to just put people in seats to meet those numbers. Sure. I want quality people, and we're getting them. It just takes a little bit more effort and a little bit more creativity. So we're going to keep at it, and our folks, especially in our patrol bureau, will very much appreciate the support that's going to come with these extra bodies.
Thank you.
Yeah, as far as the fire department, we currently have a list of 14 eligible candidates. Obviously, there's been no job offers made, so to Chief Bonnie's point, we have to see about qualifications on backgrounds and other screening. But in terms of the positions that we currently have proposed, we would be able to fill those with what we've got. In terms of the other question, where are we at meeting the needs? I agree with the city manager. We are able to meet the current needs, but I'm also proposing, as you're aware, a refresh of our strategic plan. And in there, I think behooves us to study staffing at a more specific level before we recommend any further positions, because I want to really understand what our staffing picture is so that you as the policymaker can make informed decisions based on those impacts.
And Chief Bonnie, are you also looking at some sort of like development of like revisiting of a strategic plan in the same context?
Absolutely, yes. We actually just revised our strategic plan in the focus of your strategic plan that you did and the goals that you set back in January, and just continuing, like I said, just to work together to fulfill the needs of our community. And we do have a growing and vibrant community with a lot of special events, and so we have to be very cognizant of what those special events require in terms of public safety, and work very closely with the fire department to make sure that we meet the needs that we have today and also project what we need into the future.
Thank you both.
And I'd like to add the fact that I've been working with Chief Bonnie to make sure that we have diligent and consistent and ongoing traffic enforcement. Our weekly reports from Lieutenant Cassoon show that we've issued over 1,100 moving violations since the first of the year, and I think they're finally starting to have an effect. People are slowing down, being a little safer. We still got a long way to go, but we've made a big impact in that area. So with that permanent commitment to patrol, we're going to need more patrolmen to do it. And I think we're seeing that in these requests. So thank you.
Any more questions on positions? If not, we'll move on. The next two slides were actually in last year, but it's still an important issue. And as we discussed last year, between the recession, the PSPRS, and the other issues, including even the pandemic, equipment replacements were deferred for several years. We deferred way too many. I mean, because the vehicles are getting used every day, especially in patrol and those type of things. So last year, we brought forward a plan to get the age of our vehicles back down to where it needs to be. Our average age right now is 13 years. Which isn't bad if you don't use a vehicle a lot, but some of our vehicles need to be replaced every 5 years because they do 100,000 miles a year, not a year, but over that time period.
And what's the goal?
The goal is that little circle there, which is to get it down. If we look at this slide, which is the next one, you can see last year we had 129 of our vehicles in the red, which means they were older to where there wasn't the safety equipment on them. There wasn't the other things that would be helpful and useful. So we started to bring the age of the fleet down. Again, that varies. To say a goal is hard because a goal for dump trucks is one thing. A goal for patrol vehicles is totally different. But just to let you know where we are at bringing these down into the appropriate range for the different types of vehicles. Last year we approved 49 as part of the budget. We're still waiting on 24 of those. Probably won't be received until next year just because of the supply chain issues. But with that, this year we only needed to have 38 in the budget, which is still more than your average. Generally, we'll see about 30 when we get this caught up. So I think if we get our vehicles in, if we get these 38 done, the following year we should be more on a standard trend of what that replacement is and how that works. Again, we got our vehicles' age range is 1 to 30 years. Of course, like I say, it's hard to give you an accurate range because the fleet is in different type of sections. Fire trucks is one thing, police cars are another, and then the white fleet, the stuff everybody else uses, is kind of in between that. But it is going well, but this year you do see a little higher than you will in a normal budget for equipment replacement.
Mark, my question regarding what you said about vehicle replacement being ideal at a number of 30 it sounds like. Is that correct?
Approximate, yeah. It's going to vary.
All right. So do you think with the vehicle request we have for this year, that when we look at next year's fiscal budget, we'll actually be closer to tracking that target?
Yes, I do believe we'll be getting there. This was the year to kind of get that caught up. And again, I think, there's always going to be years that you have to replace a fire truck, and it's going to be a lot of money, even though it's one.
Sure.
So the dollar number is going to vary as we go out over time. But we made a lot of progress with the ladder truck. We made the mobile command center for police and fire this year. We also got a lot of vehicles on order else that were needed as we move.
So I guess another question I have around that is, have we identified, my understanding with fleet is we have a fleet service management plan, is that correct?
Yes, we have fleet service management, we have a fleet service facility. I don't know if you've been able to get out there and view that yet. Several mini mechanics, I don't even know if Justin's here. 6 mechanics, and I think there's a part-time that we're making full-time. But yeah, we do the maintenance. It's an internal service fund. The departments are billed for whatever those maintenance costs are, and that's how that all works.
So does each vehicle have essentially, is it being monitored to say, okay, this trash truck, say, has X years of reasonable life left in it, and we need to kind of put it on the list? Do you have a rolling 5-year plan on,
Yes.
on fleet replacement?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
I would be glad to get you a copy of that if you'd like to see it. It's
I would
many
love to see it.
pages. We'll pull that together and email it to you.
Awesome.
Anything else on vehicles? Again, just as a reminder, because it's a little inflated, and also we got a lot of carryover from this year that you're going to see, but a lot of it's related to vehicles that just are slow coming in. So let's get to it, see what a $250 billion budget looks like this year. $280,834,000. So we had a 5.7% increase in the general operating budget. Not totally the responsibility of the COLA and pay plan, because it's not all COLA and pay plan. We also have fuel, we got energy costs, we got a lot of other things in there we're going to talk a little bit more about. The PSPRS tax, you can see I'm only budgeting half a year. Depending on how much they lose this year and how that impacts the actuarial, I'm semi-confident that we should be able to stop the tax. And we also have a contingency in there for debt service. As you can see at the bottom, we have $35 million contingency. There's a lot of unknowns that the council is facing right now, whether it's open space, whether it's future parks, whether it's land acquisition, the airport layout plan, or whatever else might be out there. To be able to act on that in the next fiscal year, we need to have appropriation, so we budgeted it. There isn't cash available for such things. For the $30 million, the $5 million is related to grants. The $30 million, so we budgeted a debt issuance to cover that $30 million for whatever we may or may not need. You have to pay debt back. Debt is always just a financing means. It's not a funding means. And we got to pay that back. So we have to include in our operating budget some level of debt service. So that's what we have in here at $3,980,000. And the reason I bring that up is going to be reiterated as we go through these slides, because if you use that capacity, especially in the general fund, that operating capacity is not available for firemen or policemen or deputy finance directors or whatever other positions we may need. So we'll get into that in more detail.
Yeah, I think that's a common misunderstanding when we discuss the budget, that if we're applying for or we're anticipating grant awards, whether it's coming from the FAA or other sources, unless we have that amount put into the budget with the, I guess you don't want me to talk about that, huh?
Nope.
Unless we put that into the budget, we can't spend it if we actually were awarded those grants, correct?
Correct. You got to have the appropriation. You'd have to pull it from other projects.
Great. Councilman Montoya.
Mark, so $30 million, so of that contingency, $5 million of it is
For grants.
Is for grants, and then $30 million of it is a debt obligation.
If we end up needing it for something, Not sure what at this point. If I
So-
knew, I'd put it in the budget.
No, and I appreciate what the mayor's point and your point around it too. I guess, I imagine you didn't just pick $30 million out of the air.
Pretty much did.
You did. So
I
you just,
mean, you got to have a number, and do you have a better number? I'll change it.
no, I don't.
Yeah, I didn't either. I feel 30 million should be appropriate, adequate, I guess. Is it too high? Probably. Hopefully not too low. And if we don't, I'm not going to issue debt until there's a need to issue debt.
Okay. So I guess along that lines, have you thought about what the debt instruments are going to look like, whether they'll be rev bonds or general obligation bonds? I mean, does it depend on the issue that we're trying to solve?
Yes. Yes, it does, and yes, I've thought about it. Actually, I've set up a workshop for June 14th, I believe, checking with Sarah. I believe it's on the 14th. We're doing a workshop on what debt issues or options are available to the city. We will be giving you guys the debt handbook, so you'll know the different debt options that are out there and what's tied to them and how much we currently have outstanding in each of those. Depending on, there's multiple ways you can approach it, which is why we decided to do a separate workshop so you guys could just get a handle on what kind of debts the city can issue. But generally, voter approvals or general obligation bonds, which are the only type of financing that is actually a funding source because it's tied to an increased property tax to repay it. Everything else is you got to come up with the money to repay it. Utilities, we use a lot of WIFA loans, obviously not an option if what we're looking at solving here is something else. We can do obligation bonds, which again, we'll talk about in greater detail on the 14th.
So can I just ask a clarification question? When you say this $30 million number that you just came up with, that's dealing with airport issues, open space issues, and was there another item you said?
Any issue the council runs into this next year. We have a lot of unknown things that the council is dealing with right now. So we felt it was important, or I felt it was important, that we have a contingency in there so that if something comes up after we adopt this budget, we can move on it, not wait a year for the next budget.
But if it's a revenue-based bond, or it would have to be voted on by this council for approval, and if it's a general obligation bond, it would have to be voted on by voters. Is that correct?
Any bond issue will be voted on by this council. General obligation also has to be put on a ballot and taken to the people.
So I think the point I'm trying to make here a little bit is, just because we've budgeted it doesn't mean, just because we budgeted for this contingency doesn't mean we're obligated to spend this money.
Absolutely not. We do not have to spend this money. Last year, we were budgeted at $22,500. $5 million of that was, again, a grant contingency because that's what we put in each year for that. $10 million of that was a debt issue, like this $30 million, which we ended up not doing last year. And then the other 7.5 was related to available capacity in the general fund. No available capacity in the general fund this year, so the whole 30 million that's not grant would have to be a debt issue.
And if I'm looking at this correctly, if I'm understanding, the 3.9 is the servicing of that $30 million debt?
And again, that's an estimate based on the worst case scenario. You know, who knows where interest rates will be in 6 months, whether council's going to want to have a 5-year term, a 10-year term, a 20-year, a 30-year, a 40-year. All that would affect that, but again, we needed to have a placeholder in there, which will go on for whatever the term is.
Is this the highest level of a contingency that we've had, or have we, in your time here, have we had higher contingency debt obligation?
No, this is the highest budget we've ever had.
Thank you.
So how do we pay for a higher budget? I think it's important for everybody to kind of remember where our taxes come from. As we look at different issues and different concerns, it's always not clear, I think, when people start talking about things. As you can see, restaurants, hotels compose about 8% of our general fund local sales tax. That's the same as rentals. That's less than construction. General merchandise is our biggest area. Again, that's the way, and even home improvement stores are 5% of our tax revenues.
Okay, Mark, quiz number 3, Naxos.
National, it used to be the consumer or commercial thing. NAICS is, gosh, I don't remember. I'll have to look that up and email you. It's one of those things we use all the time. It's a NAICS code like you put on your IRS form or whatever.
Consumer spending?
No, sector.
Ion index?
Industrial.
North American.
Yeah, there you go. Industrial, industry classification.
Okay.
This is the taxable ability report through March, which I believe I emailed out to all council earlier last week. As you can see, the numbers are incredible. Still not quite clear, I understand, how we come out of pandemic at 13% or 6.97% for the first 9 months of this year. Not long-term sustainable, in my opinion. I think we're going to see some definite slowing of this once inflation gets sorted out and those type of things. But obviously, we are seeing some slowdown in our construction area as well there for various reasons. Another thing to keep in mind about construction is, although we put it into operating revenues with the rest of the taxes, it is really a sector of the operating revenues which is one-time in nature. You only build a house once.
Yeah, for the most part.
Right, and we want to use it as such, so for capital that year or whatever, not police officers, which when it goes away, they still want to be paid. Bed tax, again, is doing great guns this year. You'll see that as we get on to the revenue reports, which are right here. So I'm going to spend a little time going down this because there's a lot of good news on this, and there's some little good news and concerning news. So obviously, sales tax, we're showing an increase of 12.2. That's a 12.2 off of budget. Obviously, we estimate we're going to end the year above that 39.6. But we do feel that we will be close to that 12% or 44 million in the 2%, which means there's over 2.2 billion of taxable activity in the city probably at this point, which is an interesting thing to consider. PSPRS, dedicated tax, showing only a half a year there, so we do have something there. A big increase in transient lodging. Again, we're not projecting a 64% increase. It's the 900,000 was coming out of pandemic, and we didn't have a clue what it was going to be. We feel the 23 numbers are a good estimate. The property tax increase 1.7 is solely related to new constructions and annexations. It's not an increase on existing houses. We do have some capacity there, not a lot. The franchise taxes are relatively level. I mean, it shows a slight decrease there, but they're relatively level. Intergovernmental is an area that I have some concern in. Not that I don't like money, but going through some of the components of that, that's our share of the income tax. It went up from...
That's shared revenue.
It is our share of the state income tax. It went up from 5.8 to 8.8. Again, I don't think that's sustainable. I would not be surprised to see it not grow, not be 9 million the next year. I would be concerned that in '24 we're going to see some slowdown in those revenues. Obviously, you're also going to see state tax. Well, it went up this much. You don't need as much. You know how the state legislature likes to go. State sales tax, 5.2 million to 6.6. Again, significant increase. The vehicle license tax, which is part of that in the general fund, 3.4 to 3.8. Not that huge of an increase there. And HERF had a pretty significant increase from 3.8 to 4.7. So all of our state shared revenues had significant increases, but state income tax was up like 46%. Going down, license permits pretty level. The service charges are up 14%, which is significant. Some of that is changes from the 22 budget. We're coming off the pandemic. We weren't charging for parking fees and other things. Now we are. We have more realistic estimates in there. We have additional shared revenues anticipated from our partners in the Prescott Regional Communications Center, which is also in there, and also rents on the new City Hall. Were not in there before, are in there now. The fines and forfeitures utility services are up slightly. That's the result of rate increases council has adopted already. Again, when we do the rate studies every 5 years, council looks at stepped increases over that 5 years that go into effect throughout that period. Solid waste is up. Again, rate increases that have already been adopted and also some that may be coming, depending on how things go, but also a more realistic projection of actual usage of the transfer station. We're constantly exceeding the hauling that we think we will out there. So obviously it brings in more revenue if we're hauling more trash. Solid waste, and then airport services is up. Again, we get those revenues from Robin. I assume it's just the additional operations and things out there. I'm sure she'd be happy to answer any questions you have on that. Golf services we get from Billy Casper, but their operations are also pretty significantly up out there, which is all good to help cover those costs. Our internal service funds, as we mentioned, is fleet. It's self-insurance, it's facilities, and it's engineering. Again, there's just projection of increased use of those type of facilities internally. And the other is made up of the governmental impact fees, also interest and miscellaneous revenues, which fluctuate. Mostly the increase is related to the increase in impact fees. Grants are down. Councilman Montoya asked if they were down because of the ARPA. They're down because we project different things. Yeah, we had ARPA in the projection last year. We don't have it in there this year, so that did impact this as well. But there's some things are projected up, some are down. It was hard to identify exactly. Also, impact fee audits was another question Councilman Montoya had. We do those every other year as per state law. This year, fiscal year 22, will be another audit that we do on those. And we do a rate study every 5 years. We'll be starting the process of that. Public Works has their plan to start their capital update of their capital plan, which is the fundamental part of starting that. And then we do the IIP and the various things. The actual finalized study will be coming back in 2024, even though we'll probably start it in 2023. And yes, the capital plan, the large capital plan, the increased cost we're seeing in utility capital projects will result in needed increases in utility revenues as we get into the rate study, which was your other question. With that, looking at our property tax comparison, and again, we show this a lot, and again, I want to remind council, why is this? Why can we provide such a higher level of service to our citizens for less money than they pay in the county, or they pay in Prescott Valley or Chino Valley? It's because Prescott is still the retail center. We still have the predominant amount of the big merchandise, the Costco's, the Walmarts, all those things, which provide more revenue for us to offset the cost of these services. So it's something to keep in mind. Also, I wanted to point out here, you can see back here, we don't have any red anymore, but this is the end of our last property tax bond. Again, just pointing that out to think about as we get into the capital stuff. The last property tax bond was related to the purchase of the lakes for open space and recreation. As we look at a Gateway Park, and as we look at open space on Glassford Hill, or any type of recreation thing, there's always that as an option, as a GO bond issue, so that the voters can let you know whether they really want those type of things.
Councilman Montoya.
Related to that bond issuance, that happened for the lake purchase.
Yes.
Do you have an idea of what the impact for the average property owner was in terms of the adjustment in their property tax? And if you don't know off the top of your head, that's fine, but I'd be curious to know, because I think that's, before we, go and spend money that is the taxpayers' money, it's useful to know what the impact is going to be.
And definitely, and there are strict reporting requirements on what has to be put out in the ballot information, and that is one of them. Hold on just a second. Part of the problem with that is, what's an average house?
Right.
I mean, we always use 200,000, but I'm not sure there's too many 200,000. I've been using 200,000.
Isn't it based off of assessed value too, which is
Yeah.
typically significantly different than actual real property value?
Depending on when the house last sold.
Yeah.
When we did the Lakes bond in 97, 98, somewhere around there, it was approximately the same as the regular property tax. So if you paid $67 for the primary property tax, the secondary was $67, as I recall.
Okay.
So it wasn't significant, but
You were doubling people's property tax bill.
no, just the city portion.
Oh, the city
portion is about 4% of your property tax bill
Yeah.
in total, if you look at the little pie
Yeah, I
charts
mean,
they
not
put
their
out.
overall property
Right.
tax bill, obviously, but.
Yeah, so that's, yeah. And again, if we go that way, if we even think about going that way, we'll run numbers, and before any decisions are made, you'd know what that impact would be.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, as you pointed out yourself, that was the taxpayers choosing to do that. We didn't do that.
Right.
Nor did a previous council do that. Previous council chose to send that to the voters, and voters decided, yeah, that's worth the money to get those lakes. They've been a huge asset to us. So yeah, I really appreciate you framing it that way for us earlier.
And Mark, is it 4582 per resident for 200,000?
Yeah,
Right, and what are we raising in total property tax? About $1.9 million? Is that?
yeah, it wasn't, it is 1,905,000.
So that's the return on the tax.
Right, so it's substantially less than 1% of our entire city budget.
Yeah.
Oh, it's entire, it's about 3 or 4% of the general fund.
Right.
Oh. All right. So
Can I
looking,
ask just one, I'm sorry, Mayor?
Sure, go ahead.
Just one quick follow-up. Does anyone here happen to know what the total cost of that lake purchase was?
depends. It was for the purchase of the lakes and the constructions of the amenities out there. So the total amount of the bond issue was 15 million.
Okay, that's what I,
The total project ended up being closer to 20 because part of the lakes was water rights. So the water fund paid for a portion of the water rights.
gotcha. Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Going back to total revenues, where do the developer impact fees fit in to all this?
Developer impact fees for utilities are under utility services. Developer impact fees for public safety and streets, police, fire, and streets are under other.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, looking at total expenditures here, just to point out, we did have the change in the salary, the COLA and the CPI and the merit. Keeping in mind that has different impacts on different things. When you look at what portion of a budget is personnel, a lot of our departments run about 70% personnel. Public Works, even though they're the highest personnel service costs, they're also the highest other cost at 49 million, which the personnel cost is only 28 there, so any increase in personnel has a lesser impact. As we go through, general government is made up of all the different general government clerk, city manager, city council, finance, legal, all those different areas. Community development is up to slightly, of course, the COLA and the energy cost issues. Fire is up, as you can see, significantly, but again, that's with all those new positions. Even though they're grants, they do fall under the fire department. Library is up at 4.3. The police are up again, that's with the new positions in there as well. Rec services is up with a lot of that being related to the golf course, increased operating costs at the golf course with those increased operations, as well as their golf course superintendent, as well as fleet and facilities below it is up because of revolving inventory in the fleet area. Even though that gets charged out, it has to be bought in through fleet. Regional communication, of course, is up because of the new dispatchers and supervisor. Portion of that, of course, coming from our partners. Airport is up, again, increased operations. And non-departmental is down, and that is because the PSPRS tax is only for a half a year in there. So that is considered in that number. As we look at capital, of course, it's listed here so that we can get to the total budget, but we're going to be looking in more detail at capital in the last 40 slides of this presentation. So I don't want to spoil it by going into it now, but I do want to talk about the general fund. This is a graph for those of you who've been in these workshops will recognize our general fund, what portion goes to what. Again, if you all remember, I pulled a slide from an old workshop just to kind of give you a comparison. As we see the PSPRS unfunded liability, 7.6% of the general fund. In 2018, we did this graph a little different, but it's still kind of there. I thought it was an interesting comparison. Back then, you could see the PSPRS was obviously killing the general fund at 20%. So public safety total here is 71.5. Obviously, recreation is big, the library, general government, again, facilities, which is primarily the new city hall at this point with the debt service and things over there. This is operating, not capital. And community development. So where does the money come from, which is kind of the point I wanted to get at, back with the debt service on whatever our contingent debt issue needs to be. The revenues we have to cover these expenses do not go up just because the need for police and fire go up. They go up for other reasons. Council has little control over these revenues as to whether they go up or not. Obviously, local sales tax is huge at 43%. Intergovernmental is huge at 38%. But the other items, the service charges at almost 10 is probably the biggest area, but the rest of it is pretty small. And its correlation to being able to cover the actual needs, the perceived needs, the desired needs, or whatever you want to call what people's expectations are of the general fund are purely not related. I mean, we got what we got. So if we spend it for this, we can't spend it for that. If we spend it for debt service.
Mark, can you go back to the previous slide? I had a question about that, and I appreciate the context of you showing the previous one for, what was that, 2018? Okay.
Yes.
So I guess my question is that 7.6%, now that we're looking at retiring PSPRS, the 443 tax, potentially halfway into next year, it sounds like now, because of market performance potentially.
Yeah.
Which I'm very sensitive to. So my question, I guess, is this 7.6, is this a sustainable number that the general fund can manage?
And again, and that's my point, is the sustainability of being able to continue to pay this is depending on what other service levels you want to provide.
Right.
The 7.6 will go down as the debt pays off, because this is only the unfunded portion.
Sure.
It's not the normal cost. This is unfunded. So next year, this will be much smaller, and the year after that, we would hope it would almost go away.
So, but I guess my question around that is, we didn't have a whole lot of control. To a certain degree, the unfunded liability was out of our control to a certain degree as well, right? I mean, part of the reason that PSPRS got in the trouble that it got into was some questionable investment choices they made along the way.
There's a lot of blame to be placed in that whole situation, but that didn't help for sure.
And so I guess what the nature of the design of that proposition was such that when we got to the level that we're at now, that we could see the end of the unfunded liability being part of our general fund. Is that the notion?
Yes.
Okay.
We should see the end of it, and as we see the end of it, and if we look at canceling that, I would propose that we modify our pension policy, that if one year we have a pension obligation come back, that we allocate monies to eliminate it quickly.
So that we get in front of that debt, so we don't
Exactly.
have an unfunded liability going forward. That
Yes.
sounds like sound fiscal policy to me.
Yes, and again, those are important things to do, but they do impact your ability to hire new whatever positions. And that's something we need to keep in mind as we move through this presentation and we look at, proposed fire stations and potential impact to the general fund of proposed fire stations. And we don't want to build fire stations we can't staff.
Right.
So we have some slides to talk about that. I just wanted to kind of get the ball rolling on getting that reality. This isn't the water fund. The more water you have, the more revenue you have, or the more water you sell, the more revenue you have. This is, you have this amount of revenue, you can't do this amount of services. You can't have more police and fire if you want to get rid of the library or whatever, that type of trade-offs.
Councilman Tenney.
I'd advocate for keeping the library if we can. Could we go back to the pie graph where we're looking at the revenues for FY? There you go. Service charges, since that's a relatively substantial amount of our revenues, can you break that down for us really quickly and give us 3 examples?
Just
Or
3?
2, whatever works for you.
I'll give you examples. You can stop me if I get carried away. And I had a graph that I took out because nobody liked it but me, that I had in these for years, that showed the growth of these different revenue streams over time. And service charges is one that your staff worked very hard through the recession to make sure we were charging for things that were costing us money, like parking at trailheads is a big revenue source. Renting out ramadas at parks, ball field rentals, ball field league fees, rental of cell towers, those type of things all fall into this. Plan check fees for building permits, those type of things.
I'm glad you gave me more than 3 examples. Those are excellent. Thank you. I'm glad to pay my annual parking fee for the trailheads.
Thank you. So I'm sorry, Mayor, did you have a question? Talking about PSPRS, I wanted to put up the history to date and the projected for the end of this year and projected for the end of the tax, hopefully. And again, I'll point out that if we are able, and I'm pretty sure we're going to just need to do it. I'm not sure we're going to ever get the numbers in time to make the decision in time, absolute, but we'll do our best. We're going to be able to retire this in 5 years, which is significantly less than 10 years. And I wanted to go over a reason why that was. The projections we used to put the tax together and came up with the 10 years had certain assumptions, and the council and staff exceeded those assumptions. They didn't assume that we would put in, $12 million the first year from fund balance. They didn't assume that we would continue to pay the unfunded liability arc out of the operating funds. They didn't contemplate that the state would be able to come up with a hotshot liability. So all these things have worked to allow us to cut that way down, which is great, and I think council should be congratulated on taking those aggressive steps. And also, we were able to do it. And the other factor that really caused this, which none of us really had any ability over, was the incredible sales tax growth we've seen over the last 5 years, which allowed us to continue to pay the unfunded liability arc out of the general fund without cutting services, and also increase the amount of tax we were getting from the 3/4 cent. So with that, as you can see, we're already down to being 84% funded from 30% funded, which we were at the beginning, which is incredible. And as we get more and more, all of our new firefighters, all of our new police officers will be in Tier 3, which is is fully funded. As we sit here, it's a pooled tier with most of the other funds. There's 6 or 8 that chose not to be part of the pool, but everybody else is in the pool. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions on the PSPRS. What will that mean when it goes away? And again, we bring this up, which is a graph that I'm sure everybody's seen at least 10 times, where we show the different property or sales tax rates at the different communities. Again, Chino's at 10.35. We're at our PV's at 9.18. We're currently at 9.10, and we'll be at 8.35 when the PSPRS tax goes off. And again, that's 8.35 while we're continuing to give you fire and EMS service, which the other communities do not in those tax rates. Here is the list of the bed tax projects brought forward during the budget process with the comparison from one year to the next. Again, there's a recreation development capital on the bottom of that, which I believe is identified in the capital sheets that follow. And I think I saw John, and they're here if we have any specific questions on these. If not, we'll move on. So this is an important slide, and again, as I pointed out in the beginning, we try to give you a summary and not go into long slides with lots of numbers, because I know not everybody enjoys those as I do. But this one I think is important because it is the fund balance of these funds, which is important to discuss. We broke them down into kind of primary areas: general fund on their own, streets on their own, bed tax because it's a kind of a unique fund, and then we kind of lumped the other funds together. But as you can see, just looking at the general fund, 24 million at the beginning of the year, 10.5 million is coming from revenues surplus, which is great. Again, we have such increase in intergovernmental shared revenues, or our share of those revenues. I wouldn't want to build operations into those at this point. I think we really need to see if they stand up over the next couple of years. Then we have capital, and the capital that we transfer and is paid out of other funds, and that is what we're going over in the remaining slides of this presentation. But that's a big part of where the fund balance goes. And then again, we have a contingency possibility there, which would be paid for with a debt issue of 30 million, which requires a contingent operating expenditure of possibly close to 4. With that, that 13.9 is what we end up with in the general fund. And how is that situated? We have an operating policy on the general fund of 20%, 10% for budget fluctuations, and 10% for cash flows. So that's 20%. That operating reserve is fully funded. Additionally, there are some long-term liabilities that are obligated out of the general fund, which we need to keep a reserve for. Those relate to older pay plans and payouts that are out there, been changed, they no longer exist, but employees still do have those monies coming as they retire over time. It gives us not much unassigned, and again, that was done in order to achieve the capital needs that were brought forward. Again, if the grants are not able to be received for the SAFER firefighters, we are going to have to look at maybe deferring some of the capital or something, and we'll bring that to you with the tentative budget adoption once we find out.
So quiz, SLAFER.
SAFER?
SLAFER.
SLAFER?
SLFRF. I guess that's your next slide, so I'm
Oh.
giving you a little advance notice.
Oh, okay.
I have a question.
I know that one. I didn't know it in relation to this slide, though.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I have a question. I'd like to go back to the sales tax.
This one, or?
Well, my question is, what % of the sales tax do we send down to Phoenix? Last I heard it was 5.6%.
Oh, what percentage of the sales tax is state? Yes, it's 5.6, 0.75, and on this graph here, it shows each of those.
Okay. And then what do we get, how much did we send to Phoenix the last fiscal year?
It was
What was the
5.6.
revenue? Yeah, was that like 80 million or,
I don't know. We don't send it anywhere. They pay it directly to the state.
okay,
State's tax code is different from ours, so you can't just extrapolate from our
Oh, they
tax
keep
code.
it. Okay.
They tax different things in a different way, and
so they keep it, okay. And then in the shared revenue, what percent do we get back, or what number do we get back?
what
Shared
dollar amount? I can give you the dollar amount. If you want the percentage and how that's broken out, it's a complicated formula, which I'd be glad to email you, but
That's okay, but the dollar
the
amount?
dollar amount I can give you.
Okay.
Went right by it. We'll get 6.6 back in fiscal '23 is our estimate.
Okay,
Which again, obviously, if we're getting 22 million out of our 2%, 6.6 is a very big number out of the 5.6
yeah.
percent. Any other questions, or we can move forward?
Just really quickly, there's no, at any point, what's the word I'm searching for? There's no guarantee or no assertion, that's the word I'm looking for. There's no assertion by the state that their share of our local sales tax, would stay here locally. That pays for things like public schools and
Exactly. It
streets
goes
and
for the
Department of
general
public
funds.
safety, et cetera, et cetera.
The share that is returned to us is based on a ballot initiative that was done in the 70s that said the voters all voted on that this amount will go back to local governments, which is why we try not to use the shared revenues, because they don't share it out of the goodness of their heart. They share it out of a ballot initiative that was put out to keep us from doing a local income tax or other things.
Sure, yeah. So Mayor Pro Tem is making a great point. We do send a fair amount of money down there through sales taxes that are raised
Yes.
locally, but it's for the entire state, which we benefit from.
And we benefit from it for grants at the airport from the department, ADOT, and we benefit when we drive on the highways to Phoenix and various other things.
And in addition to that, we do receive a small amount of that
Yes.
back in cash through revenue sharing. Sounds like
Right, for local services.
that's good clarification. Thank you. Good
Thank you.
question.
Yeah.
All good points, thank you. And again, please feel free to interrupt. It's good to get all this discussion out there. Yes, Councilman.
Councilman Montoya.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just, not to get hung up on this contingent debt issue, but I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. So $30 million, do you have, is there a rate that you used, or did you blend a rate to come up with the 3.9 in the first year of service?
I used a relatively high rate over a relatively short period of time. And again, not knowing how much we're going to issue, if council wanted to pay it off quickly, like council wanted to do with the new city hall, or if council was willing to stretch it out. So
Can you give me a
there's
ballpark of
nothing
what that rate
magical.
that you used was?
It's like, I think I did a 10-year term for maybe an all-in cost of 5 or 5.5%.
Okay.
Again, all in, because bond issues are not a straight-up loan. There's attorney's costs and other costs you got to get in there.
So, and another question about issuing a bond, is there concerns about, I guess, have you thought about the concerns, or has the city staff thought about concerns of, and I understand 30 million is like the worst case scenario, it sounds like, hopefully.
It's the guess. It's not even worse or
Okay,
less.
but setting that aside, 30 million, would that have an impact to our rating with credit agencies at all? Is there any concern around that? I mean, that's a large, to me, 30 million seems like a pretty large debt issue.
That is, I did look at that. It would not, at that level, although it does use up capacity. So if whatever came up this year used up that capacity, you're not going to be able to use that capacity for open space or parks or anything else in the future. We will be discussing all those things at the workshop on the 14th with our outside financial person from RBC,
Okay.
Royal Bank of Canada.
But Mark, even with the 30 million, it doesn't eliminate any capacity. There's still capacity left. It's
There
just
is
like-
still capacity left at the 30.
And it just looks like, if I'm reading through the numbers correctly, it looks like, obviously we balance it out. So, I mean, that's the good news.
And that's the point of doing it. And again, we talked about capacity, I think, the other day at a meeting. I can't remember which one, but, as we said then, we have more capacity than we could ever repay. Unfortunately, we won't put ourselves in that position. And again, we'll get into all those numbers and details and give you a reference guide that you can have whenever those questions come up at the 14th meeting.
I look forward to it.
It'll be fun. All right. State, local fiscal recovery funds. It was part of ARFA. It was part of our ARPA. Again, we talk about it as ARPA, but it wasn't ARPA. It was actually a program, a subset of it. But anyway, the designations the council made in February were for a ladder truck, the ever lengthening and increasing in cost ladder truck at 1.82, I think is where we ended up with last week. Mobile command center, 500,000, which is where it ended up. The concrete at Kinlinley is currently still estimated to be maybe 80.
It's actually Bill Valley.
Bill Valley, sorry. We'll get that changed. It's Bill Valley, not Kinlinley. We had the wrong park up there. Proposed projects. As we put together this capital plan, we identified some projects that we can talk about as we go through each of the departments where we think is appropriate to use the remaining allocation. If council does not want to use the remaining allocation for one of those, then we gotta use it for another or cut another project, because as you know, there is no real unassigned balance. And again, just because we brought the capital forward and staff feels the capital needs that are brought forward are needed, and the manager reviewed and agreed to bring them forward, some of these projects can be postponed, delayed, or eliminated if council desires. With that, wanted to get in the capital budget. The first area I wanted to cover was Mayor Pro Tem Rusing's emailed a question about fire stations. So working with Chief Dura, we put together this schedule and a couple more slides which the chief will speak to. But this one, basically, I just pulled all of the capital facilities and kind of response times projects off of the capital plan for the 6 years that are presented out there. And as you can see, there's a lot of them. There's 21.3 million in capital, but the bigger problem, the bigger issue is obviously there's operating impact. So I thought it was important the council keeps that in mind. If you build a station, you got to staff a station. So the first station, when it goes up, you're going to have to add another 1.5 million to the general fund fire budget to be able to put a truck in there and put firefighters in there, and so on and so forth. So if we ended up needing to build all these stations, the fire department operating budget would go from an estimated 10.7, which is what is in the budget, to 15.6, which is fine if you have it, but if you're paying debt service out of general fund, you aren't going to have money to do that and hire cops or hire librarians or accountants, whatever. So you need to keep that in mind, as we don't want to, we need to address response times responsibly and appropriately to not outstrip the operating capacity of the general fund, because the revenues there don't go up just because people want shorter response times. With that, I will turn it over to the chief to go over.
Mayor, can I ask a question real quick? Mark, what is station alerting?
We'll let the chief handle
Yeah,
that.
I can cover that here in the next slide. So, first of all, let's start with the big why. I think it's really important for us to have a conversation when we're talking about station infrastructure to talk about the outcomes that we're desiring to achieve. And here are the response time targets that are in our currently adopted standards of cover, which are required as part of our accreditation. Those are based somewhat on national standards, but also based in part on community desires. Now, that being said, real quick, and to the mayor's point, let me speak really quickly to what the effective response force is on that slide. That is the balance of a full alarm assignment. So on a structure fire, we don't just send one engine. We send initially 3 engines, a battalion chief, an ambulance, all kinds of things. A cardiac arrest scenario, similar situation where we send multiple resources. And so that's the definition of that effective response force. However, I think for this conversation, when we're talking about new stations, the first arriving, the 6 minutes and 30 seconds that you see up there, is really the target I think we need to talk about. That being said, even more important are the intended outcomes. And currently in our budgeting for outcome approach, we're looking at fire property saved percentages, increased cardiac arrest survival, and an associated improvement in ISO ratings, the Insurance Standards Office, and any other trickle-down effects from those insurance ratings, particularly on the commercial sector in town. Now, all that said, in terms of the intended outcomes, there's multiple ways that we can achieve those outcomes, and it's not just station infrastructure. And the plan that we're putting in front of you is capital intensive around stations, but we're also augmenting that with other things such as station alerting. So you see a little bit of a plan there of a 4-pronged approach, enabling initiatives. I would recommend that we, A, optimally locate our station infrastructure. We know we're behind. That is definitely true. We modernize our response technology, and I'll get into that in just a second. Find a way to further mitigate the low acuity incidents, and those are things like what we've already done with our alternative response unit. And then finally, also look at community risk reduction efforts. And you see some of them there. For instance, good leveraging, smart leveraging of responsible building codes, further wildfire mitigation, leveraging our EMS contract to reduce the risk in the community. Those are all things that we can do in order to make those capital investments go even further, and also to reduce some of that need. Now let's go back up to the optimally locate the station infrastructure. Some of the things that we've already talked about are things like the regional standards of cover. It's important to know that the Prescott Fire Department lives in an ecosystem of response with CAFMA, Groom Creek, and other partners, and that is fiscally responsible. So please understand that the 5 stations we currently have aren't the limits of our system, and it's actually really smart governance overall. The other thing is with the police department, we're already looking at leveraging some of our capital needs at our drill ground, for instance, that you see in here as well, to help with property and evidence needs, as well as some other things. So we're not just saying it's all fire all the time. It's public safety, and it's a joint approach. Now, to your question about station alerting. All right, so currently we are on a Zetron system. That's just the industry brand name. And that system currently, when you have one of those structure fire responses and approximately, say, 8 units get dispatched, they get sequentially dispatched. And that sequential toning can take anywhere from 10 to 15 seconds. That's 10 to 15 seconds that's incurred between the call processing, the 911 call coming into the center, and then the firefighters turning out once they know what they're going to. By leveraging modern station alerting, we're able to take that 15 seconds that we currently incur between those 2 response time segments and simultaneously alert all of the stations at the same time. The other thing that that does is for our regional communications center, it reduces the task saturation that those dispatchers currently have. They have to verbally come on the air and announce the call. That initial dispatch can be, if we choose to, and would obviously have to work with the police department as well as the comm center there, can be an automatic robo voice, in essence, that comes over the air and takes that task off the dispatcher's to-do list, so to speak, and they then can handle the caller at the same time and then just talk to the units once they're on the way to the emergency. So that is the station alerting that we're recommending. There's some other downstream effects that I'm not going to cover here. They include firefighter health in terms of cardiac, but there's good evidence, very objective, hard data that we can save achieve a lot of that total response time to achieve those intended outcomes, in addition to just building new stations. So I'm hoping that makes a little bit of sense. The live system status management that we were proposing is also an add-on to our computer-aided dispatch system. Currently, we do what are called move-ups. So as the system experiences calls, more calls happen in that ecosystem that I was talking about. We move stations that are currently in the station to other areas where we anticipate, based on history, that we would anticipate to have a call there. So for instance, our station 75, right by Costco, travels either into Prescott Valley or into the city, depending on system needs, but that's not done on an algorithm, that's basically done on a flow chart. So there's a technology out there that's proven, we wouldn't be the first municipality to use this, that in essence takes historical call volume experience, as well as time of year, time of day, other things like that, and actually makes those moves and those recommendations based on where those calls are actually going to happen. The initial, and we have not yet gotten further research, but the initial indications is some folks are saving move-ups by almost 40% in their response systems. So that's saved costs in fuel, that's saved wear and tear on apparatus, and that's an increase again on the primary thing we're trying to achieve, which is to meet our response time objectives to hit our outcomes. Low Cutie incident, I'll cover that real quick as well. Obviously, we need to further optimize the ARU. Low acuity call diversion is something some systems are doing right now, where low acuity calls come into the 911 center. Instead of sending a 911 resource, it's sent either to a nurse line or another type of service that helps the customer or the citizen out in that situation, but doesn't send an ambulance or a fire truck down the road to take care of a low acuity problem that could be handled in another manner. And then finally, another thing I do want to highlight there is leveraging the EMS contract. We're about to hit the second year of our contract with Lifeline. There's plenty of opportunities with public-private partnerships where we can figure out ways of doing things like community paramedicine, other ways of fixing a little bit of this low acuity call volume increase. Our call volumes are increasing. We've communicated to you that, but that's not to say that cardiac arrests are going up, fires are going up at a rate greater than the overall call volume. The call volume is going up particularly on the low acuity end, and I think we can make a significant difference because that is part of the sample size that we're going to report to you on an annual basis saying here's our response times. So before I go to the next slide, questions?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, I have a couple questions. Going back on the last slide, I think it was, where we've identified costs associated with what's being called Fire Station 76. I think there's, maybe it was the slide before, but it was the acquisition cost.
Yeah.
How did you go about determining the acquisition cost and the location? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so first of all, I've got a recommendation in here. We need 3 new station locations, and those station locations, based on our GIS study, in part what we came in front of you, I think about a month and a half ago in terms of public safety locations, indicate a location in Granite Dells, a relocation of Station 73 somewhere closer to town, and then a new station near Watson Lake. And the latter two, we already have either an opportunity for partnership or we already own the land. And so my recommendation would be that that Granite Dells location where we don't currently own property, we get ahead of that, think about purchasing that land prior to even further property escalations, and target that there. The way that that was derived was to look at suitable parcels in the Granite Dells area currently based on commercial property values for about 4 to 6 acres, depending on what was available at that time. So,
thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. And then going back to your comment about the EMS partnership we have with Lifeline, I know that our neighbors to the east, CAFMA, have expressed some concerns around their relationship with CAFMA or with Lifeline and their EMS partnership. Do you have similar concerns, or how do you feel about the response times that we're getting from Lifeline currently?
right. For one, I don't have enough data yet to speak to that fully. I'll tell you that one of our primary missions is to deliver the highest advanced life support services that we possibly can. I do have anecdotal evidence that we have some shared concerns with CAFMA, but I think as a city of Prescott, we need to make sure that we do a good analysis of that, and that is why our contract with Lifeline is responsible as we get the opportunity to renew it on an annual basis at this point, so.
So what are your metrics for going beyond anecdotal and kind of measuring results in terms of real data around, what that response time looks like from them as an EMS partnership?
Yeah, so it goes right back into our standards of cover and these outcomes that we have up there, primarily the cardiac arrest survival. But there's also other things that we want to talk about. For instance, stroke alerts, trauma calls, things like that, system capacity. And I would say system capacity is a measure that we really need to think about. How many ambulances are available during drawdown? We do have instances where we have to get creative in terms of patient transport, or we have delayed on scene times for our fire engines. That is more than anecdotal. I've seen that myself, and I've heard that from my command staff as well. And like I said, it's a definite priority for me to put an objective report together so that we can all look at that together.
When do you anticipate having that?
Within the next 6 months.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Tenney.
Is there a standard for what you term a low acuity call? And if there is, you may have some data on what percentage of your calls are low acuity. And could you give us a few examples? I'm thinking, what comes to mind for me initially is cats in trees, stuff like people feeling lonely, et cetera. But you probably have some better examples.
Yeah, the most common examples that I think we can use in this case are things like sick person calls, somebody not feeling well. Nationwide, the use of the 911 system has gone up for a multitude of emergencies. And so we're using an emergency resource, right, to solve a more lower acuity problem. Sort of the best way I can describe it is the difference between urgent care and an emergency room, right? However, we're also seeing augments where, for instance, we're seeing long-term care facilities call for our help. Lift assists is a great example where we go to a facility over and over and over again simply to lift someone off the floor. Now, I want to make sure that I communicate clearly that is one of our customers and we will come if called. But I think it's also very responsible for us to look at that in partnership with those facilities and say, that's not good service provision. This tool is not meant to solve this problem. And that's exactly where I think we can make a huge impact.
So do you have a standard for what you term a low acuity call, in which case you'd have specific data, or do you just kind of say these are clearly low acuity calls, these are more emergency calls, and you can ballpark for us what percentage of your calls are low acuity?
Yeah, it's based on the priority dispatch system that's done at dispatch, and that does categorize calls into certain categories. We can probably do even a further fine analysis on that, and that's exactly why when you do a low acuity call diversion, you have to triage that at the center of the 911 system so that you can, with some assurance know you're sending somebody that really doesn't have a problem to such a resource. But yes, so.
Chief.
And ballpark for us, just the percentage your
In terms of low acuity ballpark, I would say probably in the neighborhood of 25 to 30% of our calls.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. A little bit of history for the public. I just would like to reiterate that our last fire station was built in 1993. That was 30 years ago. I remember when we moved back to Prescott in 1986, our population was about 15,000. Now we're 45 plus if you count the CAFMA, the coverage partnership with CAFMA. So I hope that the public doesn't go into shock when all of a sudden we say that we need 3 fire stations. This is something that should have been taken care of, I think. We should have built one, I think, about every 10 years, but for some reason we didn't. I'd like the chief to go back to, he mentioned station number 73. We need to move that. Where is station 73 currently located? Which one is that?
So Station 73 is the station currently located on airport property.
Okay.
Now, I want to make sure that I emphasize there as well, I don't recommend that we pull all of the resources out of the airport. As a matter of fact, we will still need that presence for the airport firefighting needs. However, the structural component and the EMS component of that will be moved closer into the core of the community.
And then the second one, you mentioned the Granite Dells area. Is that the one by, maybe by the roundabout Watson Lake Park?
Watson Lake would be a separate location. This is closer to 89.
89, okay. And then the third one is maybe by the roundabout there, Watson Lake
That's
Park
correct.
area.
Mhm.
And then my last comment would be, hopefully, we will reach out to our developer stakeholders and maybe ask them to participate in maybe donating some property. I'm sure they would be eager to help us out with our public safety needs. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's responsible as long as those parcels meet the needs of a fire station as well as are in the correct location for the community.
Okay, thank you.
I know the previous chief was talking about instituting this quick trucks type of vehicle to be able to be used for these low acuity response calls. I haven't seen that mentioned in any of this material. What is your plan for that?
It's in that bullet ARU optimization. I apologize because I did throw an acronym in there. So Alternative Response Unit Optimization under Mitigating Low Acuity Incidents. And what I'm talking about with optimization is we currently have staffing plans to staff that Monday through Friday, sort of 8 to 5 during the middle of the day. And I would actually propose that we look at when those low acuity calls have their highest incidence and staff that unit flexibly to make sure we target it at the times that the low acuity calls are at their highest.
So will that vehicle be moved around based upon that analysis? Or if it turns out that it's pretty common within the coverage area of a particular fire station and may be permanently assigned?
So yeah, the low acuity calls are system-wide, and I would propose, especially when we have limited alternative response units, that we put them geographically at that time where those needs are the highest, and that's why system status management software, like I talked about earlier, is also key.
Yeah, I think that's, in general terms, that's one of our biggest challenges, because as we grow and provide more residential units, particularly in the North Prescott area, we get the initial construction TPT, but after that, the primary beneficiary is the county, because the property tax from elevated valuations of those properties generates property tax that goes to the county. And we don't receive the funding sources to be able to pay for the public safety response, for the fire stations, for the vehicles, for the staff. We have to rely on transaction privilege tax that generally is not reliable coming from those new residents. So that's really the dilemma, because we're providing the public safety and all the ongoing costs without a reliable ongoing revenue to pay for those. So that's our challenge, and that's probably why Mark needs a new deputy finance manager to figure that out for us. But that'll be an ongoing challenge for this council and future councils. Councilman Shishka.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, the police department's been relatively successful in utilizing volunteers to save money. I would imagine that the fire department could do the same thing, or you have a totally different situation?
We currently use volunteers on a limited basis. Actually, currently, some of them do things, for instance, like our mail carriers that make sure that equipment, supplies, and mail go from station to station, as well as some limited public education opportunities. And definitely leveraging that, I think, is very responsible. The problem comes when you're trying to get into a more reliable service provision, particularly in technical services. So once we get into fire prevention or obviously emergency response, finding volunteers reliably that can operate at that level consistently is a little bit more challenging, especially for a community our size. But where we can, we have leveraged and will continue to leverage volunteers to help us out.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Oh, I just wanted to comment, thank you for hitting the ground running. Once again, we had a big forest fire for you, and now we're telling you we need 3 new fire stations too. Thank you.
We'll get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
All right. Thank you. I think we've covered this slide. In the interest of time, probably pass it back to you.
All right. Now the next few slides go through capital by department. as we go through them, you'll notice, just flash real quick, as you look at fire, there's this lovely purple, I guess, color for those items that we identified as being part of that fund balance from our capacity from the the Slurpee. Carryover in the general fund, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of it has to do with vehicles, but not all of it. But we didn't really get into the details of that because we looked at all that last year. So, and all those are under contract and underway, but they do need to be part of the capital budget. Again, the departments are here to talk about all these things individually. They know a lot more about them than I do. Obviously, City Council, I don't know if the manager wants to talk about that.
Climate profile?
Yeah, the climate.
I think that's something that's been generated from the council.
Okay. So, yeah, we did hear that you want 40,000 there for a climate profile. Not sure if that's still necessary since we had that presentation.
Yeah, the update is that the University of Arizona Climates Department, I think it's Dr. Allison, is it's going to be at no cost. They got a grant
Okay.
for it.
So we
it's
can
gonna
pull
be
that out of the budget?
Yeah,
for
please
the
do.
assessment. Yeah.
We will pull that out. Again, we thought that might be the case, but we wanted to definitely hear it from you. The Granite Creek Corridor project has funding from all sorts of areas, including grants, including the general fund, including bed tax, including streets for the drainage portion of it, and including a gift, very generous gift the city received. Yes.
Councilman Montoya.
Thank you, Mayor. Regarding that Granite Creek Corridor project, I know that there was previously some challenges with, and I'm sure Tyler, I see Mark looking at you, so you can come up here and answer this question for me. I know there were challenges. We were trying to get some grant sourcing from the federal government. There was confusion about that, and then they kind of said, come back next year. Is that still where we're at with this?
Yes, and in fact, it was last week we received the initial approval from a state board for the funding. We actually requested twice the funding. We initially requested about $500,000 in grant funding, and now we're requesting $1 million because of the estimated costs pretty much doubling up to $3 million for the total project, right? So it's actually Thursday morning, we'll be at the State Parks Board meeting for approval. And once we get that from them, we have pretty much everything we need, and then the feds kind of do the rubber stamp, and we'll go forward.
So am I understanding you correctly? It sounds like the ability to move forward with that project, in spite of the escalating costs that have happened, we've made them aware of that, and they're willing to bridge that delta?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Other than the vehicle replacement, which is part of that vehicle replacement fund, which is under the community development, and the some improvements they identified at the new city hall for the customer service area when they move over there, the rest of these items are all grant related. So that's part of the CDBG and then the Apply gaming contract. Questions on that? We'll move on to facilities maintenance. Has a lot of interesting things here. The new city hall has another $3.8 million for capital improvements, a $225 for a generator, and $100,000 for a sign package. That's a total of $4,155,000.
Councilman Montoya.
So, Mark, related to the new city council building, or the new city hall building. No, it's more than a city council building. I wasn't on council when this purchase happened, so I guess I'd like you to give me some understanding of how this happened. We purchased this building for $7-something million?
Yeah, 7.75.
7.75. And now, how much have we already put into it? And then what is the total that we'll end up putting into it, I guess, is kind of what I'm driving towards.
Of course, the total is always yet to be seen.
Sure. But I mean, according to our projections that we have right now.
We have the initial cost, and then we have $401,500 that is put into it this fiscal year. We have a combined $4,155,048 for next fiscal year, for a total of $4.6 million on top of the purchase price.
So that gets us to roughly 12 million?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember, I'm old enough to remember when the city council was hesitant to build a new building because it was going to cost $12 million. I mean, I guess it's not really a question. It's just, I guess I'm surprised by how the price of this has escalated. And I know that we've had supply chain challenges, but this seems above and beyond that to me a little bit. Is there anyone that can speak to that?
Joe and Tim could speak a little bit to what we've experienced if they'd like. It's not just supply chain, it's cost of materials, it's cost of labor, it's everything under the sun. But go ahead.
Everything under the sun. It's, the cost of everything has gone way high. So just supply and demand, getting stuff right now. One of the big things, all the interior walls are steel studs. Steel is through the roof right now, 50-60% higher than it was 3-6 months ago. That's what's driving these costs up so much. For example, like the generator piece on there, which is $225,000. About a year ago, it would have been about $100,000. The cost of generator has gone way up. It went from the generator that would be spec'd would have been about $40,000, $50,000. It's upwards close to $100,000 now, and 12 to 15 months out. All of that stuff's just driving those costs way up.
Fair enough.
Mayor Pro Tem, excuse me.
Oh, I just would like to say I'm also shocked at I guess you call it the overruns, and the numbers that we were given originally have seemed to have rapidly ballooned. But like you said, nobody could foresee this problem that we've had with the supply chain and cost of construction materials and labor. And one example I'd like to use is our airport terminal. We brought that in under budget and on time. I believe it was for $10 million, but we were lucky that we got it finished when we did. It was perfect timing, because if we were trying to build a new airport terminal now, it would have cost a lot more than it did. So that's just a comparison.
$18 million. Councilman Shishka.
Thanks, Mayor. Just for grins, if we were to build a $12 million building that was $12 million 3 years ago, what would it cost today?
I can't answer that honestly, but I don't think it would cost $12 million. One thing that drives a lot of this too is fuel, right? Everything uses fuel to be made. With diesel, $5.40 a gallon these days, that's, what was it, 3 something last year? Now it's up to 5. That's driving the cost of the production, the cost to transport the products. From the vendors we have in place, they've told us we've got to get it ordered so that we can get it locked in, because they're trying to get those prices locked. Because just over a 30-day period, it may go up 15-20% in cost.
So would it be closer to, let's just say 15, 16 million would be not unreasonable?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. So trying to compare what the estimate was to build a building versus what it would actually cost today is somewhat, not apples and apples.
No, not at all.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Tenney.
Yeah, given that this is costing more than we anticipated a couple of years ago, I'm not happy about it. I'm not satisfied with it, but I wouldn't say I'm shocked. Looking at all of the various city contracts that have come to us over the last several months, this is a trend that we've seen. Everything is more expensive than we anticipated when we first looked at it. Does it mean that meat has gone away? It doesn't. My own home on Zillow has gone up, 30% in the last year and a half. it's just a thing right now. So it's an unfortunate thing, but it is definitely a thing, and it certainly shouldn't bring any surprise or shock, maybe some dismay for sure. But we got to bite it and go forward, because this place that we're in right now is falling apart.
I mean, if we say, well, let's just defer these improvements until the prices start to moderate and drop, there's no guarantee that these decisions that have caused fuel and labor and everything else to escalate to this level are going to moderate.
Correct.
When? When does that happen? Even if we had some senior national leadership that was able to come to its senses and make some decisions to bring us back to where we were before this national leadership took office, that's not a light switch.
Yeah, you're right.
It takes a long time for these economic decisions to filter down into practical, measurable impact locally.
Sure.
Although, quite frankly, I still am shocked about how quickly those decisions have turned into this escalation of pricing and labor and cost and fuel and delivery and everything else.
It is true.
So I think we just may be, the better decision is to say, this is what we're dealing with today. Let's get the job done and finished. And then we can always look back on it and say that was a great decision, or maybe we could have waited a little bit. But I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, Mayor, I think you're exactly right. If we know when prices are going to come down, that's valuable information. If not, we should probably go ahead and roll forward with this. And you're exactly right as well. On the national level, decisions have been made that's led to some very high inflation. Last time we had inflation rates this high was when we had the opposite party in power. So you just never know what's going to happen.
If I recall, I think that was President Carter. Go ahead. First part of President Reagan.
I wasn't alive, so I'm just going to defer to you two. Mark, I have a question, and maybe this is for you too, Tim. So the price we're at, like I said, it's just close to 12 million. This doesn't get us across the finish line, though. Is that correct? Like, is this all the costs that are going to be associated with this new building?
That's kind of a loaded question, but that's the plan, yes.
Okay, so this is, so I guess, I mean, these are the bulk of the tenant improvements we're looking at this
Correct.
point.
Correct.
So there's,
As of,
I mean, I understand maybe there's some nits on the edges, some of the people who are in there now, if things happen in the future that we can't predict,
Right, so
that's going to change things.
we plan, as we had originally talked a long time ago, to get this done. So this would get us to there. Those other things you referred to, depending what those happen, that's already budgeted here. So if different things change, there may be money left because we haven't done part of it. That's going to come at a later date or whatever the case may be. But this was like this is what's there.
This is final build out.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
that's helpful. Thank you.
And again, not to hedge that bet, but it's our projection of final build out today. If something gets delayed a year, it might be more, obviously. So these are our projections now, though, with every intent that this should be enough. But a lot of facilities projects there, some interesting ones. Citywide card lock system, which is something we should have done years ago. We've been trying to get done, give our city facilities actual security, not just keys that are all over the town. Another thing to just, I was going to, HVAC, I'm not sure what the acronym stands for, I hate to say it, but the replacement is something to keep in mind. We do have a lot of those units, and that is an ongoing thing.
Air conditioning.
Yeah, it's air conditioners, but again, the presentation here is what we've used for a lot of our department stuff here, where we look at 23, which is the budget the council will consider, but we also put the 24 to 28 projections for these particular items to give council a full understanding of what's coming, but we do not include things that are in those further out years that don't have expenditures budgeted in 23. The fire department items, which we went into in some detail, one notable thing there, obviously, there's engine replacements coming over the next 6 years, in addition to what we've already done. Those will need to be funded. Any questions? Departments are here to go into whatever details you want to go
Councilman
into.
Montoya.
Yeah, I have a question. What is an extractor washing machine?
So that is a washing machine specifically made for fire turnout gear, which is obviously very expensive to extract the carcinogens out of that.
Got it. Thank you.
Moving on to the next set of departments. Fleet maintenance obviously has a lift that they need. It comes out of their operating funds. Again, we can read through all these. Again, we have another one of our purple line items there that we're proposing, some facility renovations. This was an exception to the rule I said previously under the police department. I always thought it was important to have up there for discussion the fact that police facilities are projected in the out years of almost 5.5. Put that stupid thing down. 5.5, again, that was also with the fire items, the impact fee study, the last infrastructure improvement plan we had. The fire station relocation of Station 73 was on there, but the other stations were not. They will be on the next impact fee study that we do. The 5.5 for the police facility improvements were, I believe, in the impact fee study that we did, and again, will remain there. Any other notable things we'd like to talk about? Obviously, we have golf cart replacements coming up this year.
Mayor?
Oh, yeah. Councilman Montoya.
Just a question on the golf cart replacement. When I was out at the golf course with Joe and I was talking to the Billy Casper personnel person, are we doing a complete turnover of that golf cart fleet that we have out there?
Yes, Councilman Montoya, we'll turn our old golf carts in and get the used cart value for that and then apply that towards the purchase of the carts. We're also going to add 30 carts to the fleet. We often run out of carts sometimes, especially during the weekends or during tournaments. A little perspective on that, in 2014, we did 56,000 rounds. Last year, we did 90,338.
Right.
So we're going to up that, and of course, the revenues will go up. And if you remember in the previous slide, I think we've got about a 20% increase in revenues or 15% increase in revenues. That's related to those rounds.
And so with that $700,000, it's not likely that we'll have to spend that money again anytime real soon because we'll get a certain amount of life out of this new golf cart fleet.
5 years is what we got out of the last, and we also improved technology on the batteries. We could maybe go to 6. We'll have to monitor that. And the other good thing about the new carts with the lithium batteries is it reduces about 50 pounds per cart. Doesn't sound like a lot, but ground compaction is one of the hardest things on turf. So whatever we can do to lighten that fleet is going to help.
Great. Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I understood that correctly.
Any other questions on these departments? Capitals? Recreation services, looking to do a little open space. That's basically the end of the, available funds that we can probably legitimately take out of the old open space fund. Questions?
I have one.
Councilman Montoya.
And I know, Joe, you answered this in my email, but I just want to clarify for kind of public record. Is that 8.5 designate for a specific purchase?
Yes, it's the 300 acres of the Storm Ranch, including the homestead.
Okay, thank you.
And another, Joe, before you head out, another big one there, which is we're using those available capacities of West Granite Creek Park improvements. I don't know if you want to go into those.
Yeah, I would like to talk about that a little bit. So this is the area behind the splash park that we built last year. It's kind of the final piece of that whole West Granite Creek cleanup, or Granite Creek in general. It'll tie into the Granite Creek corridor. There'll be a large pavilion there, a grass area for community events. We've got it designed to where we could do a farmer's market there, a midweek market, a smaller market. So it'll really kind of be that last piece between where you enter Granite Creek Park off of 6th Street, running all the way down through the corridor, all the way to Aubrey Street, and it'll create a nice green space for the public to enjoy.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I'd like to ask a question about the adult center. Do you plan on any expenditures for the adult center?
Councilwoman Rusing, no, we did not.
Okay, thank you.
Also, just to point out, the Grandel's Gateway Park planning is up there. Again, using those resources, obviously if it's going to cost $4 million, not sure where that's going to come from, if it's going to be a debt issue, if council wants to consider it with other recreation projects, or even obligation, a geo bond type election thing for recreation projects and fire stations. You can do a combined type financing. There's a lot of options we can do as we look at these, but there is no really funding to build this park. The funding is to get the plans together, and then we'll figure out the funding, whether we can get grants or whether we need to look at other options in the following years.
Councilman Montoya.
Mark, and maybe this is something Tyler can speak to a little bit better with regards to that planning part of it, but what does that look like? What is it? I mean, it's 350?
350,000.
350,000. What are
Joe can address.
What is that? Or Joe, yeah, if you want to speak to it.
Yes, Councilman Montoya. What we did through the North Prescott area planning was kind of came up with a conceptual plan with those designers, Leslie Dorfler, and their group. And so from that, then what this would produce would be engineered plans that would be, construction shovel-ready plans, I guess. So this would get us shovel-ready for the project, and so it includes all the engineering necessary.
And so is this just on the portion, like this is that part of the purchase that's on our side of in terms of the entryway from the Prescott side?
Correct. So this would be on the 475 acres of the Arizona Eco Development, the open space that we acquired. And this would be near the old Highway 89 and would be kind of the gateway to the park. So about 20 acres of that 475 acres that would be developed into a park, not a traditional park, more of a natural park. We have a 3-acre reservoir or lake that could be stocked with fish, some easy, low mobility hiking trails around that, a fishing pier, a couple pedestrian bridges that would cross Granite Creek in that area, trail connectivity from all 4 different directions. So really just kind of the gateway to the 475 acres, and also would be part, the Storm Ranch would be part of this regional park as well if that purchase comes through, which I expect to bring to you guys next month, hopefully.
We still have quite a bit to continue with. We've been at it for almost 2 hours. Let's take at least, how about a 10-minute break?
Okay.
And then I have a 2:57, so we'll reconvene at 3:05.
Great.
Thanks.
What's going on, Chief? I have very good people, don't I?
There's one right there.
He is good.
I don't work any harder than I have to.
3:05, we're reconvening here for our City of Prescott budget workshop. And we left off after we got to the next item, which was outdoor basketball courts.
Yeah, and again, we don't need to go through the individuals. I mean, it's wherever you have questions, staff is here to speak to them. Again, not to continue to harp on a point, but new Gateway Park coming online, a new library branch in North Prescott, all takes operating money.
Right.
So we need to be careful as we look at debt issues, because that's going to use up that capacity to staff any of these things. So
It just reinforces my comments before as we continue to grow as a city, as the residents grow and expecting similar amenities and services, being able to find the revenue to be able to pay for those doesn't come out of property tax.
yeah.
So we have to find other sources of revenue, or make sure that whenever they spend their dollars, they're spending them in the city of Prescott.
Definitely.
We can require that, but we can certainly suggest
We could
if they're
try.
doing their civic duty, shop here in the city. Yeah.
Again, any questions on the remainder of these? Joe, I'm sure can handle them. All the write-up on all these projects and many others were included in the 190-page capital book online.
Real quickly, you may know off the top of your head, or Joe could address this. Tell us where the outdoor basketball court's going to be.
Outside.
Okay.
I had the same question.
Do I need to answer anymore? It would be at Willow Creek Park, right across from the car dealership there. There was an old Ramada that we had to tear down.
Yep.
I just wanted to point out, it's in the cap card too, if you guys want to read that deep, but in our 2008 Parks Master Plan, it was pointed out that outdoor basketball courts were in a deficit back then, so they really are right now. So that could be another amenity right next to the dog park in Willow Creek Field.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Thanks.
Joe, before you walk away, how many court, what is it going to look like, the courts?
I think we got 4? Two full?
It's 2 full that can be divided. Yeah. So it's 2 full courts, regulation size courts with the hoops, and then those can be divided to half courts, and then they can play the opposite direction too, if they're gonna do shorter games.
Oh, got it. Okay, thank you.
And it also has lights, fencing, it's the full package, so.
Nice.
If no more questions on rec services, and now, there it goes. This is just a recap of all those capital projects and where the actual funding is coming from. Again, it's just re-emphasized from all the capital cards to tie out to the various budget items that are on like the fund balance sheet and other. The next area is airport capital, and we'll have the Dr. Sabata come down and walk you through. Want this or this?
Sure, that'd be great, thanks.
Or you can just hit the arrows,
Yeah, you want me to
whichever.
stand over here?
Yeah, you can stand.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Robin Sabata, Airport Director. So you don't just trust me, I have to go through this, huh? No, I'm kidding. So this is the FY 23 capital lineup. The top of it up there is airport, city-only funded projects where there aren't grants available, and the second part of that is airport grant-funded projects. What we're looking at is in the airport city-only funded projects, we have an airport pavement preservation program, and that is at about $600,000 a year is what we're spending. Just to give you an idea, we have 95 lane miles at the airport. The actual square footage is 5.6 million square feet of pavement. So it's quite a bit. And per our grant assurances, after the FAA gives us quite a bit of support, they expect that we properly operate and maintain our facilities. So this is to continue to keep up those pavements. Since I arrived in 2018, we've replaced a lot of the pavements, and fortunately it was with the support of the federal government. So this is our requirement to continue to operate and maintain those pavements. We do have $600,000 in for T-shade hangar acquisition, and this is actually for acquisition of a hangar that's outside our fence line right now that will be brought into the airport fence line. It's a TTF agreement, and it does have a revenue stream with an ROI of about 12 to 13 years to get that $600,000 investment back. A couple of vehicle replacements are on the slate. One is a sweeper, and the other one is a pickup truck. And we're in negotiations in the back of the room about the possibility of that vehicle replacement, a little adjustment there. We'll talk about that in a bit, but we're doing a little horse trading on that. Bottleneck hangar complex improvements. This is leading into what will be the Future Safe project, and this will be some taxiway adjustments in ingress, egress point. Also, there is a stormwater pollution prevention plan requirement that we have a wash rack to wash aircraft, and so we've got that planned in for this year as a SWIP requirement. Fueling system, this is actually a combination of two things. This is a fuel system that we need to relocate. It's a diesel and unleaded fuel tank that is now in our fuel farm, and it's going to go on the north side, along with the upgrading of our generator at the lighting vault, which has a fuel source to it. And then the airport master lock system, periodically you update your keys and locks to make sure that security-wise that you keep things secure. So the top part up there, all total is about 1.9 million. Some of this will be offset by the fact that we are receiving ARPA and CARISA grants. That's the American Relief Plan Act. And the CARES Act funding that's going to come through. So for the next 2 years, we do have special funding of $1.073 million each of those years that can only be used on airport, and that'll offset our operating revenues, which helps to contribute to some of the capital expenses you see up there. Under the airport grant-funded projects, just to give you an idea of what we got going on, we got the Taxiway Charlie realignment. Some of these are considered holdovers, and so they started one fiscal year and they're ending another year. So we have phase 2 and phase 3 of Taxiway Charlie. This $6.7 million is our best estimate, but we're going out for bids, and the bids are due this week. And because of all the increase in the escalation of prices, and because this is a high priority project, we've been in touch with the FAA, and if in the possibility that it comes back with bids higher than the engineer's estimates, it does look like we will be able to get additional funding from the FAA to be able to cover the differential in the cost of the additional materials. Interestingly, throughout the state, there have been some bids that came back actually lower than expected. Now, that may be because the engineers are trying to estimate higher to try to catch it, so we don't know if it's a chicken or an egg, but the FAA is watching this very closely because this is happening throughout the country. Under the runway 3 right, 2 1 left extension, this is a series of steps through the extension of that runway, and incidentally, we are having open houses next week at the airport on Monday from 4 to 6 and Wednesday from 3 to 5. If people want to come out and learn more about the runway extension project, just come out to the terminal, again, Monday and Wednesday, 4 to 6 and 3 to 5. Please come out and see more about this runway extension project. So it's about 2.6 million of that, about 2.2 million of that is under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and we anticipate that may be used for land acquisition. So it's next one is perimeter security upgrades. This was actually an ADOT grant. This is a carryover from previous years. So that one is going to be, that project's going to be completed this year. We've got several other projects up there. The lighting and signage project, that's an ADOT project. The Strategic Academic Flight Education Complex, that could be a state grant that we're expecting. The North Ramp Rehab Project, the PAPIs, which is, by the way, the Precision Approach Path Indicator System at the airport. And so that's a navigational aid that's going to be installed on 3 left, 2 1 right. And we have a donation that offsets the EA Love statue of $125,000. So that will be acquired in the next year. Taxiway Delta Rehab and West Ramp Rehab, those are design projects. And then we have the closeout of the Wildlife Hazard Mitigation Plan. So all total, we're looking at about $15.4 million. If you look at the grant obligated portion of this, essentially for every $1 million that we're getting in a grant, it costs us about 50 grand. So it's a pretty good deal. Any questions on this?
Councilman Montoya.
Robin, I just want to say good work on getting a lot of grant money. That's impressive. It's always nice when you come to us with projects and like what we're looking at today, and you've done a lot of the work to secure the funding. It certainly makes it easier for us to move forward with those projects. So thank you.
Absolutely. Mayor Pro Tem.
Oh, I'd just like to add that the funding and the grants from the FAA is kind of like the benevolent grandfather, and it does have strings attached, and we need to uphold our end of the bargain and meet the FAA rules, regulations, and guidelines in order to keep that funding coming along.
Thank you.
So of the 1.9 million that's city-only funded projects, you were mentioning that there's a chance some of the ARPA funding may offset that?
That's correct. Approximately 300 and some change is going to go toward operating budget to make us budget neutral on our revenue, our operating budget. And then the remainder of that can reduce our operating budget and we can reallocate it toward capital. That's the way that grant works. And that grant is airport only. We cannot use that in another part of the city.
And then we really look at those T-shade hangars as almost a recovery of our initial investment over the 12 or 13 years of the leasing of those T hangars.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to be able to look at that total amount and say, boy, that's a real bargain compared to some of the other things we've been discussing and considering today. Thank you, Dr. Sabata.
Thank you. And the airport actually works off a slightly different plan than the rest of the city. We work on an airport capital improvement plan that's an ASIP. What we do is we enter in a 5-year projection of all of the types of projects that we want to do. On this slide, you're seeing the city-only funded projects because we plan those out as well. And on the next slide, but I can go back to that one, I'm just showing, the second slide shows you all the grant-funded projects. And so if we want to go back to the city-funded projects, this gives you an idea of what we will likely be returning to the council for each of the next 5 years. That'll be city-only funded projects. In FY24, we have another $1.073 million in the offset for the COVID relief money, so that can help to offset FY24. The biggest thing that you can see up here is of the $6 million total for the next 5 years you see on the screen, half of it is pavement preservation. About 1.7 million is the T hangar and taxi lane and ramp expansion. There is always the possibility that we could get additional state funding if it pops up, but right now it's programmed in as airport city only funded. When you get to the airport capital improvement plan for the grant-funded projects, what you see up there is over $90 million in projected capital investment into this airport over the next 5 years. Add that together with the $15 million you'd had, and now we're over $105 million in 6 years that we're looking for, with an average of coverage being 95% by state and local sources. So we have a pretty progressive budget ahead of us for continuing to seek funding, including things like an ARF Index B, that stands for Aircraft Rescue and Firefighting, a foam truck that we have programmed out. So it does benefit, or it does impact other departments who are providing services for us at the airport. And I'd be happy to go through any of these if you'd like me to. These will be coming up in the next few years.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Well, I would just like for you to make a few comments about what an economic driver for the community the airport is.
Actually, ADOT just finished in 2021, an economic impact study, and it was of Prescott Regional Airport, and the economic benefit of the airport is $194 million, and there are 1,220 jobs attributed to that resource. So it is quite a robust economic generator. We think it's an amazing resource for the community and for the region.
Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Dr. Sabata. I know that the planning and work that you've done with Dibble and the other support organizations for the airport is just a continuing, ongoing benefit to the community. And I think you know how much I support the capacity of the airport and its potential for really creating the economic vitality that I think our city needs terrifically, especially when we were just talking before about how much the public safety and other services we are obligated to provide the residents around the airport, and being able to find the funding and the revenue sources that are going to be needed to provide those services. Certainly the capacity of the airport is a key factor in being able to generate that revenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilman Shishka.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I've heard the FAA referred to as the favorite grandfather. So you must be the favorite granddaughter.
Remember, Mr. McClarty said he was going to leave his wallet. I'm taking him up on it. And one thing that's not up here and in the city budget is that we are going into meetings for the siting of the new air traffic control tower, and that could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $27 million. So that siting process starts next Monday. So that will be obviously another infusion. We could get to the point where the airport in the next 7 years could actually get up to $250 million in terms of the investment associated with that facility.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, now we're on to Public Works.
So Public Works capital is our next area, and like in years past, instead of going through a list of several hundred projects, we've grouped them into operational areas, and I'll have Gwen and Tim run you through it.
Thanks, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So we'll start today with our street capital projects, which involve our preservation and rehabilitation projects. The explanations are up there on the slides. Our circulation projects, our roadway reconstruction projects, which are major projects, as well as our drainage projects. I'll go over a couple with you shortly, and then Ian will come up and talk about a couple of the others. Some street circulation projects we're working on currently, the Prescott Library sidewalk and parking improvements. We took that project out to bid a few months ago, got a single bid, double the estimate. We decided it was in our best interest to kind of pull that back and look at packaging it with something else. Our sidewalk repairs and replacement program, we ran into a similar issue. We had a mandatory pre-bid meeting, had one contractor showed up. Again, we're looking at trying to package that. And then something that's came up fairly recently is the American Legion Sidewalk Improvement Project. And I think what we're going to do is we're definitely going to bundle that with the Prescott Library Sidewalk and Parking Improvement Project, same corridor, same area. So we're moving forward with those. And then I will let Ian come up and talk to you briefly about the citywide traffic study and the Commerce Drive roundabout.
Ian Mattingly, City Traffic Engineer. So, yeah, I'm just going to talk about the other three up here. Specifically, we've placed money in the next year's budget for a traffic signal there at Prescott Lakes Parkway at Sundog Ranch Road. That's the entrance to the transfer station, the fire training center, Peavine Trailhead, parking and all that. So obviously, we've been increasing, we talked about it earlier with the revenue at the solid waste, and we've been increasing traffic, heavy truck traffic. So we have money in there to design, and we think we can design and build that in the same year. And also we'll do some minor extension of the turn pockets so that the trucks have more storage space outside of the through travel lanes on that one. We did place money in the budget for a citywide traffic study. That was a request of the mayor. What we did is we have about $400,000 right now earmarked in there. We had gone out to one of our on-call traffic engineering consultants and asked them to look at scoping various traffic studies that might accomplish various things. That ranged widely in cost and in scope. Right now, we have enough money to do what I would call an intermediate study, which would allow us to focus in on maybe some speed information, travel time information, and then some detailed arterial analysis and intersectional analysis. If we want to do something more or less, then we could vary that amount. But that's what that's related to. And then the final part is Pioneer Parkway. So currently, we have, we're proposing to put $1 million in the budget for, you guys were approached at a recent work session by the county, asking for a contribution of the city to participate in the construction, their construction project for the new roundabout at Pioneer Park and Commerce Drive. Yavapai County has indicated that they had budgeted money. I think they have an engineer's estimate of around $3.7 million for that, and it's currently out to bid. And so we're placing that because we've heard from them, and we need to come back to you and see what you feel about that. But if we don't put it in there, then we can't fund that.
Councilman Montoya.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two questions around two of the topics you just talked about. I guess it's going in reverse order. Pioneer Parkway at Commerce Drive, that roundabout, is it my understanding, I talked to Supervisor Brown after, I think, he and the Public Works Director for the county were here.
Dan Cherry.
Yeah, Dan Cherry. My understanding is that the offer that they're making us for participating in this project is that we come in with $1 million, and even if that engineer's estimate far exceeds what they have, even if the bid comes back exceeding the engineer estimate, we're only on the hook for $1 million. Is that your understanding?
That's what they represented. They are limiting us to $1 million contribution, whether it comes back higher or lower. That's what they're representing.
Okay.
Yep.
And I guess from your perspective as the city's traffic engineer, I know Mr. Cherry talked a lot about signalization at that area versus a roundabout, and you work for the city of Prescott, not the county, so I guess I just am curious about what your specific insight is to this particular issue, and if this is an appropriate measure to kind of handle the traffic volume that we're seeing in that area, and if it will also mitigate some of the public safety concerns about, traffic.
Yeah, so obviously the need for it is coming out of the development that's going on the north side, and that's the complexity is that development is within the city of Prescott. However, it accesses a county road. So the city required a traffic study to be done by its Hidden Hills subdivision. And so there are improvements that were required by that traffic impact analysis that basically looked at a traffic signal, auxiliary lanes, striping modifications, lighting, sidewalk, those types of things. So, when you look at is a signal better than a roundabout? Yes. In my opinion, operationally, with the high speeds that you have there, the downgrade, and just the amount of traffic that's eventually going to come from the north when Deepwell builds out, and they have shown that.
So wait, hold on. You're saying you're saying is a signal or a roundabout better?
I'm saying operationally, a roundabout is preferred over a signal.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure. I heard you say traffic signal first. I was like, oh my gosh.
The roundabout is a preferred for safety and operational capacity. It is. It's more expensive, and it's a county roadway, so it's their decision whether or not to build it or not.
Right.
I will say, it's a good piece of information. The subdivider was required by the county and RTIA to make improvements to the roadway. That would have included a lot of costs that they would have incurred, and they were ready to do that to take access. And the county obviously took these steps to plan beyond just what's going on now and look at more long-term. And so there is likely opportunity for us as a city to get some of that financial contribution from the developer and maybe offset some of these costs that you may or may not want to.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question to
transfer.
you is what is that? I mean, I know we're budgeting for $1 million, but do we have any idea of what the developer's potential obligation in this situation?
Yeah, so it's preliminary, but in looking at the recent cost estimates, and the county gave us some, and we looked at some of our own, based on it's a high-speed roadway, so you've got a long right turn pocket, an acceleration lane, a left turn pocket, all this lighting and signal. I'm estimating it somewhere in the range of $300,000 to $500,000 likely would have been their cost to build those things. Now, that might have been phased in, but some of that could come back and offset some of these costs.
So the potential cost that we're looking at is not actually necessarily $1 million, but it's maybe somewhere between $700,000 to $500,000.
Yes,
potentially,
depending on what we decide to charge the developer and the time frame for that. Yes, there's an offset in cost.
And then moving on to the, what was it, the citywide traffic study. So with regards to that, I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about what the outcomes we would expect to see from that kind of study, and what would that give us, what information would we receive from that would be useful for us in terms of making future decisions around things?
So that's really the challenge in this whole thing. I think that the request probably came out of the fact that you hear from people, the mayor and elected officials hear from people all the time about general complaints regarding traffic. You know, we're growing, we have more people on the road, maybe we have more speeding, more congestion. And so typically when you do typically you don't conduct citywide traffic studies. They're not that common. We do transportation plans where we kind of model the network, and we already do that regionally through SIMPO. They do that every 5 years. And that kind of sets forth like our IIP, our infrastructure improvement plan. You know, for future growth, we might say, hey, we need to widen an intersection or do certain things in the future. So you really need to know what questions you're trying to solve when you fund a citywide traffic study. We didn't know what exactly is wanted. And so that's why we actually approached a consultant to say, you know, you do this for a living. You've obviously heard people ask questions and solve them. So they gave us a range of costs and almost like a menu of what we could get. And so it ranged from as little as $30,000. We could do, for instance, 20 spot speed surveys, which would tell us, do we have a speeding problem on our arterials? And then we did ones where we go, well, is it a travel time issue? Are we having too much delay on our arterials? And so I have this document that's like 6 pages that goes through all these things, all the way up to a $1.2 million study that basically would do most of those things and look at all our arterials and at an intersection by intersection level, evaluate the level of service that we have, delays, and then make recommendations for like future turn pockets and things like that. The issue with that is we might be spending money on intersections that we don't identify as having an issue. And so what we had to do as staff is bring some amount of money forward or some level of study. And we said, if we had $400,000 budgeted, we might be able to answer some specific questions and maybe do some arterial focused things. I think personally, as the traffic engineer, that if we were to look at travel time on some of our arterials and then specifically look at intersections that we could identify, like, you know, maybe a widening for a right turn pocket or improvements in left turn signalization or timing, things like that, we might get some value out of it. But it's a challenge for me as well, because usually we look at these things and we go, what is being constructed in the area? What impact is it going to have, and how do we mitigate that? And so we just balanced it with kind of a mid-grade study that would have a menu of options for you guys to use if we could focus in on what we were trying to solve. I know that's really...
No. That I appreciate the clarity, actually. So it's useful. I guess from my perspective, one, I'd like to see what that menu looks like.
Yeah, and we can provide that whole menu.
Yeah, so that would be great. And then I guess I would tend to agree with the mayor's assessment that this is useful information, because I think about, you know, the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting we had 2 meetings ago, I think, and I think you were there talking about the issue with, you know, Willow Creek Road on Pinion Oaks, and I think that it would be useful for this body and probably for Planning and Zoning as well to have some notion of, you know, if you're going to do future development, commercial development in this main arterial, you should have some awareness of what the traffic impacts are going to be, because this is already what traffic time is in that area. Yep. So for that part, I see the value of it. I think, you know, $400,000 based on the range that you gave is a good approach, and it seems like gives us some capacity to target it and be somewhat precision. So
yeah, that's what we tried to do. We can send this out to council so that you have the whole list of menu and you see really what you're buying if you do that.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Going back to the Hidden Hills roundabout, we've gotten many comments from the public as to why isn't the developer helping out financially with this roundabout project. And I would just like to comment that this is the same developer, Hidden Hills, who is putting in a whole phase of homes with no sprinklers because he doesn't have to. It's the same developer that doesn't have a secondary access, fire access to his project because he doesn't have to. And so now we're going to go to him and ask him for maybe $1 million, even though we don't have anything in writing. And so he really doesn't have to do that, right?
Well, so the current development has approvals on a certain number of phases, but we're still in approval of the final, I'll say phase one or C of one, and there's going to be additional phases. So there is a way for Public Works to obviously implement mitigation. And
You have some leverage?
yes, the issue becomes the county can't directly go to them and ask them because it's a county roadway. They're developing in the city. You know what I mean? So that's really where it all came in. And initially we had discussions regarding a 3-way agreement where we might do certain things, and the county's just moving forward with their project, hoping, I think they approached you, I think, because they felt like it was the best way to have the city maybe contribute and then the city try to get impact fees and mitigate it.
That's correct, Mayor Pro Tem. And I would like to add, too, that their cost of the signal will be collected by the city as an off-site improvement fee, which is already established in city code. We don't need a special agreement or a development agreement to collect this fee or this charge that we will charge them for infrastructure that would otherwise be required for the developer to build. So the county did ask the city to work with the developer directly because the development is in the city, not in the county jurisdiction. So that's kind of how the chips fell.
Have we heard anything back from him?
From the developer? So the off-site improvement fee for the signal that Ian is talking about comes into play with Phase 2. Yeah. So when the plans for Phase 2 come in, we will collect the off-site improvement fee for the signal and the traffic mitigation.
And how much is that?
Yet to be
Ian's
determined.
indicating around between 300 and 500,000 we would collect at that time.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Preliminary estimate only, not a detailed cost estimate. We haven't done a detailed one yet. So.
Councilman Tenney.
Thanks, Ian. This is all terrific information. Back to the citywide traffic study piece, a couple of thoughts and a quick comment. If this company will do a study for us telling us if we have speeding issues on our major arterials for $30,000, I can go lower than that, 29 or so. I can tell you if we have a speeding problem on our major arteries. I might even go half. It sounds like Steve's trying to undercut me already. So it's interesting to me to hear that a citywide traffic study is not a common thing. And in fact, given the services that SIMPO provides for us in that way, it's possible that some of this could be redundant. Can you speak to that just a little bit more?
So SIMPO, what they do is they actually have a transportation model that they populate. It's existing. They use the ADOT model, but they use a TransCAD model. Then they plug in like all our land development code. And so it populates with our current growth rates where traffic wants to go, and it has generators. And so it sends the traffic, and it more looks at not so much at the congestion and intersection level, but where are the needs of like laneage. So do we need a regional road? Do we need 10 lanes of capacity east and west between PV and here? So what you're talking about here is more detailed related. But what I mean by a citywide traffic study is it's difficult to, for instance, go to an intersection. We could pick an intersection up like Pinion Oaks. We could pick Pinion Oaks. It's a minor collector and arterial network. If we were to look at that today, we don't know what's going to develop on the like 40 acres that's vacant across the street. So a citywide traffic study would likely just collect existing data, might have some notion of what will happen, but they don't know the exact specifics. And so usually you wait for things like Hidden Hills to come in. We didn't know Hidden Hills would be here. If we were to do a citywide traffic study, we might not know that we need a roundabout and all those things. So that's why I say it's not a waste of money, but it's difficult because you might be answering questions that you don't have all the inputs to get the full answer. And so that's why I'm cautious about just blanketly studying every intersection when things change in the future, and you might add a commercial development that we never contemplated.
Sure.
And so that's why you need to be careful. But that's why there's
There's
a
that
whole
menu when it comes
and
to
there are
some
things
show
in
me.
here that
Yeah.
would be very helpful. And we certainly have enough of the city developed that are the areas where we do increase congestion as we just grow to the north, that we could say we need we need a double turn pocket at 4 Points because there's not going to be development, but we just keep pumping more traffic. And so you can plan for that and go, hey, in 2028, we need to budget to add a second turn lane or something. So
Gotcha, okay.
there's value. It's just, it won't be everywhere. The value won't be everywhere.
We'll need to be strategic about which of the
Yes.
menu options that we
And
choose.
you can spend a lot of money on this, so you want to make sure you get good results and a useful.
I appreciate that. That's good clarification. Thank you.
Councilman Shishka.
Thanks, Mayor. And Clark, I could absolutely say that we have a speeding problem, and I can say that for nothing.
Oh, man, I was about to charge you.
Try to
You know,
undercut that.
my question, Ian, is how do you satisfy the people who come here and expect it to be Mayberry? You know, doing a traffic study is fine, but, and people have asked for a traffic study, but is it going to produce the results that they want? You know, it's going to produce results, but is it going to make a difference? And that's, I know I'm asking you to, you know, look into your crystal ball, but I'm just not seeing people going, oh my gosh, they asked for a traffic study and we got one, and now all of our problems are solved.
Yeah, it's not going to be that magic pill that's going to do that. What you might find, that's one of the reasons I thought that a useful portion of it would be. I mean, I feel like if you could do a travel time study on some of our arterials with average speeds, for instance, so you might say, how long does it take us to get from Willow Lake Road on Willow Creek Road all the way down to Grove and Gurley? And you might find that we have levels of service on our travel times that are in the A to B range. To me, that's useful because people sometimes feel like we're level of service D and F, and then they can say, what will happen if we continue to grow at 5% and these degrade? What will we be? Well, we'll still be at a level of service B for travel time. And how does that compare to, you know what I mean? So
I know exactly what you mean. You know,
and give them the results that say we are actually relatively good here, and maybe we do identify some areas where we do need to do some work.
Sure.
But you could say we are good, or here's where we need to improve, but focus your attention on the needs.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yep.
Well, I know that when I talked to Michael Lamar, what was that, almost 5 years ago, and I asked to see the most recent traffic study, and the answer was we'd never done one.
Yep.
But we still, just like we're discussing today, making substantial decisions about how we allocate dollars to be able to deal with our traffic and our roads and our congestion, but we're doing it on a piecemeal basis or by intersection. I mean, the fact over the last couple of years that we've made the investment in some of that imaging technology to detect the movement of vehicles and then be able to connect that imaging with the timing of signal lights in our major arterial, which is primarily Willow Creek Road, was made because of some of our maybe on-the-ground assessment of how important that was. But if we're going to commit millions of dollars to make our traffic circulation more effective, then I think we at least need to look at what we might be able to get from a legitimate study from a professional and not go hog wild and spend $1.5 million on some of these feeder streets and other areas that really aren't going to make a whole lot of difference in people's experience of how well they can navigate the city. So if we focus in on some of those more powerful and impactful areas, then I think we'll be able to justify how much we spend and where we spend, and maybe able to get the results. But if we've never ever done one, how can you compare or claim that a study's not going to be of any benefit? Maybe if we did one, we could actually see whether we get the benefits from it.
Well, and I think it's going to come down to the quality of the inputs, and what you ask is going to generate the quality of the output, right? And I think what Ian is saying is when you have a cafeteria plan like this, in his expert opinion and his background, he can tell you some things that would be valuable, and then there'll be things that you guys think at the dais are valuable. You piece together a book of business, and then you go do those specific inputs to generate an output that has value.
Right, and I wouldn't put my faith in the traffic studies that SIMPO generates, being on the SIMPO executive board and knowing what they look at. A lot of their analysis is more based upon connections with state highways, so whether it's 89 or 89A, Pioneer Parkway, 69, 169, the roundabout down there. They're looking at really more regional traffic planning and how to deal with these broader funding that comes through the federal Department of Transportation and then funneling it through SIMPO. So, you know, I've been trying, for 3.5 years now, just trying to get that extra on-ramp from 89 onto 89A, and that's supposed to be $5 million, but we still keep getting overlooked or over prioritized by other programs. So it's SIMPO, you know, has its broader focus, but we're not going to get much of anything out of local arterials from SIMPO analysis or funding. And my last comment on this roundabout at Commerce Drive. As I mentioned before, the county is the one that is the primary beneficiary of the increasing property values as these developments go forward. They're the ones that get the property tax revenue, and consequently, they're the ones that have the ability to pay for these larger, costlier roundabouts. We don't get that, but we have to provide the services, and they get the benefits of development, and they get the benefits of the increasing property values of each one of those parcels, and even the parcels that are not being developed. So they certainly are having a substantial increase in their revenue in the county. And consequently, if they want to pay this high price for the roundabout, go let them do it. We don't get that revenue source to be able to pay that differential. So it's a combination of the developers and the county. God bless them, pay for it. I'm happy. Other than that, I don't have an opinion.
Tell us how you really feel, Mayor.
Well, if that's all on this slide, we'll go to the next one. Yep.
I guess before we move on, did anybody have any questions regarding the sidewalk projects? So our next slide is our roadway reconstruction projects.
Make the comment that the American Legion over there, that sidewalk, even when they did the improvements on the corner there with the access to the sidewalk and the corner cuts and all that, you still have veterans parking on that street during the icy parts of the year, and it's a very dangerous ability for them just to walk up half a block and be able to get up to their American Legion post.
Yes, sir.
So I think having a legitimate sidewalk all the way from that intersection all the way down to the library just makes so much sense. And granted, it's a small little project, but when we can bundle it together and get a more substantial interest in the contractors, I think it's going to be a benefit for everybody in that area.
That's definitely what we're hopeful for. Moving on to our roadway reconstruction projects, the big ticket item for this year is the Penn Avenue Eastwood Drive project, which council approved a couple meetings ago for a total of almost $11 million. That project will involve roadway replacement as well as utilities and storm drain work. Our pavement preservation and rehabilitation projects are lesser impact projects, more primarily just paving, not so much utilities. As we do streets, we just can't ignore them for a period of time. We have to do preservation techniques that help prolong the life of them, such as rejuvenators, going along through later, crack sealing, then chip sealing those roads.
Councilman Montoya has a question.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
So I have a question regarding the pavement preservation program. Do we have targets that we're trying to hit in terms of quality of roadway when we do this pavement preservation?
I mean, we try and increase our PQI every year, or PCI, which is our pavement, I've heard both terms. It's pavement quality index, pavement condition index. We try and increase that every year. It's definitely a target of ours. When we had, I'm drawing a blank on the name. IMS, and I do not know what that stands for. But IMS is the company that came out and did a thorough analysis of all the roads in the city about 4.5 years ago. Right. We'll be looking at probably having them do that again in FY24, every 5 years, and that takes into account to every road in the city. So we try and increase like I said, we try and increase that PCI every year. The target is at least to come up 1 point every year.
So what is it right now?
65, yeah. I was going to say it's
65, okay.
Mhm.
And what is our
I
target?
think when I started in the position I'm in, and when IMS started, I think we were down as low. We were below 60.
Okay.
I think we were 58 when IMS
And so
first ran that
does
data.
Public Works have an established target for that?
As far as,
Like, we're at 65, is that
I mean,
good enough?
I guess if
or-
we could keep going the way we're going, I would say in 5 years, I'd love to see us be at a 70.
Okay. Are there, we've heard a lot today about the increasing costs of things impacting that. Do you see the increasing cost of the raw materials to do this pavement preservation
Yes, sir,
project?
absolutely.
Will it degrade where we are right now?
I don't think it'll degrade where we're at right now. I would anticipate, we've kind of been on this steady climb. I could see us getting to a plateau point where we might level off a little bit with the escalated costs, unless we look at ways of increasing how much funding we have to do the projects. The $8.5 million that we had budgeted 2 or 3 years ago is not getting us as many lane miles this year as it was then. So, like your question for Tim earlier, what would that be? I guess if I had to make a guess, you're probably looking at close to $11 million to get the same amount of roads we got for 8.5 previously.
I mean, it's just, I think one of the things, and this goes, we spend a lot of time talking about public safety as an essential service that people have expectations around. And I think roadway maintenance is another one. I mean, my neighbors all make fun of my house because I have a bunch of potholes in front of it. They said, we thought you were on city council and you could do something about this. But I spent a lot of time talking to Craig, and I understand that we're driving down that roadway to a point where it needs to be. So I'm good.
Yes, sir.
Don't worry about my house. But I'm just saying, roadway maintenance it's an essential service we provide, right? And it's one that probably gets underappreciated until it's of low quality.
And to the general public traveling around town, that's what they see. They see the road. They see the road. They understand. They feel how it drives. They don't really concern themselves with the water main that's underneath it or the sewer main that's underneath. They don't see it. But the road they travel on every day in front of their house or back and forth to work is very important to them.
Well, and this is, and I see Ashley's up at the lectern over there. I guess my question is, do we have, looking forward into the next few years, given what you've said just now about, 8.5 couldn't get us, what it got us, 3 years ago. Do you have anticipation around the escalation of this? In terms of I plateauing, I guess, at 65 seems okay, but what my concern is not just plateauing, but then backsliding, so to speak.
And there's other elements in there. There's roadways that we improve, but every lane mile that a developer puts in on a brand new subdivision is a brand new road that goes into the system that kind of helps balance the overall pavement quality index for the whole city. So there's definitely a lot of new roads going in that help maybe balance some of the roads that are in poor shape. Like I said, I don't see us in the immediate future starting on a downward trend, but like I could definitely see us having a plateau.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Ashley Couch, Public Works Director. Typically in areas that are subject to freeze thaw, such as Prescott, you'll see often a standard that many municipalities adopt in these areas that are subject to freeze thaw, a target pavement condition index of 75. Other locations like down in the valley where they don't have freeze thaw, really, they often will shoot for an 80. It's a local decision, but that's kind of common. If we want, really what Tim said, this people, particularly visitors, but also people that live here, they form an impression of the city based on how the roads look, right? That's because it's visible, right? And so, it's really a policy decision by council, what's the target pavement condition index? It's really what the council wants. I will say that if we spend the money to do the small things and stay on top of maintenance, there's a deterioration curve for pavement. And as long as you do the routine maintenance work, you can prolong the life of the pavement before you have to do a complete rehabilitation project. And so if you let the pavement condition index get away from you and start, plateaus or starts to go down over time, you're not, maybe because of the price escalation, you're not able to do as much every year as we used to be able to do, then over the long term, you might see some, once you get out so far on asphalt pavement, if you're not doing the routine maintenance, then it really drops off a cliff quickly. And then you're at a situation where you're having to spend a lot more money to get back to where you want to be. So what we are proposing is to come back to you in probably August or possibly September. And what we will plot is time on the x-axis and average pavement condition index on the y-axis, and show at the current funding levels based on cost escalation. Here's, we're going to plateau, or we're going to analyze it, right? IMS will tell you this. And then you could say, okay, or we're going to maybe start to go down over time if you look out several years. What is the target that the city council wants? We're going to do a work study session. And then based on that, give different fund, presuming that the council wants a higher target, like maybe 75, to be kind of consistent with most municipalities throughout. I mean, look, there are municipalities that really don't spend a lot, and it shows. Right. But, if we want to be a premier community, which I think the city, that's obviously, I think, something that city council wants, then, we set a target pavement condition index, and then we will tell you, okay, if this is the target, this is the funding shortfall to get there, or this is how long it'll take to get there, and give options to, if you want to set a target of 75, then we need to increase revenue somehow if we're going to get there in a certain period of time. And then we can give you scenarios. If we increase it this much, then IMS will tell you how quickly you get to that 75 or 70 or whatever the council wants.
I was just going to say, I appreciate all that additional context and clarity, because I think for me, one of the things that's aided us in the past is our capacity to do this pavement preservation. Because when I talked to your predecessor, Craig Dosseth, when I first came onto council, one of the things that he talked about is it's much cheaper to do that initial maintenance as the road starts to deteriorate. And if you let it go too far down the line, like you're saying, then you're putting in a new road now, and it's as expensive as, it's more expensive than when you put it in the first place. So I appreciate that context.
Right. The other thing is, if we're looking at additional revenue sources, we'll work with Mark, and we'll come back and say, well, these are different ways that we can raise revenue in order to get that target of 70, 75, whatever the council decides. And then based on that, we'll get some direction from council, and then maybe come back and have you formally vote on what it is that you want from this pavement preservation program.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I have a question. As you know, we have a 1% dedicated road tax that the citizens of Prescott voted to pay, tax themselves. And how much does that generate a year? And because I see we have 20.5 million here in projected expenses.
It generates about 22 million a year now. And we also have the HERF money as our
How much is
primary
that?
to 4.6, I think, next year.
And do you know offhand when that road tax is supposed to sunset and whether or not we might ask the voters to renew it?
I believe my capable assistant is looking it up, but I believe it's 2035.
Okay.
So it's like somebody else's problem.
The Deputy Finance Director, right.
And I know you wanted us to basically spell out the acronyms to make sure the public understands. HERF is Highway User Revenue Fund. It's gas tax, basically. That it comes from the state. It's what you pay at the pump.
So how much did you say that generated last year, the road tax? 20?
4.6. The road tax, sales tax is 22 million.
22.
4.6 in the HERF.
So it looks like we're still within that funding from the sales tax then.
I guess I don't understand the question. Yes, the 5-year plan, we worked with Public Works. It is balanced. It does come in within the revenues. If we have to increase it significantly to improve road condition, that is when we would have to work on other funding sources if they're needed.
Okay.
There's a lot of cost in the road fund that gets spent on snow removal, on other things, signalization, streetlights, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of other expenses besides just pavement.
Okay. All righty. Thank you.
The Penn Eastwood is a perfect example of letting condition get to a point where you're eating up your revenues to do one segment of road. I mean, we're spending 10.5?
At 10.9.
10.9 at.
One project.
Yeah.
There's a big component of that that's the drainage component,
Yeah,
which,
but
which I'll get to. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's that road's completely lived out its life. There's nothing more to do for it. Moving back to the next slide, you notice that it is $10 million in FY23 budget. That is primarily carryover from the concrete projects we talked about earlier. So that's where you see the increase in that from our 8.5 from last year. Moving on to our drainage. Did anybody have any more questions in regard to our payment program or anything? Okay. Drainage improvement projects, the big ticket item this year is the regional detention basin that will go in as part of the Penn Eastwood project. What you see in the photograph here is the Acker Park detention basin that went in. The new one, it will have about 58% more capacity than this one does. It's a sizable structure, but it will alleviate a lot of downstream flooding that we've experienced over the years. And we will receive approximately $840,000 from Yavapai County Flood Control to fund a large portion of the construction of that. Questions? Moving on to our water capital projects. We have our water production projects and our water distribution projects, and they're exactly how they sound. Production is getting the water into the system, and distribution is getting it to your faucet, as well as our water quality projects related to our lakes and water quality within the city. Water distribution projects, 2 of them that we'll be working on this year are, you can see our budget is $2.9 million. The Juniper Vista Karen Drive area, it's up off Senator Highway, unincorporated area of the city. They're currently on a very small water main up there. Fire protection is an issue. We're going to be upgrading that water main. Those plans are fundamentally complete, and we should be able to advertise here soon. And as well as a new one that's come up is the Mullen Way water extension, again, up off Copper Basin Road, a short stretch of road up there that fire protection is important to the folks up there. So that's a project that we are currently working on. I believe we're close to 60% design on that.
Yeah. Mayor Pro Tem.
I want to thank you for moving ahead on the Mullen Way project because they were annexed into the city like 18 years ago. And nothing happened until one of the residents came and brought it up during our public input. So I just wanted to, during our public comment call to the public session. So I just wanted to thank council for bringing that back. And I understand it's going to be a reimbursement district style setup.
So yes, Mayor Pro Tem, this area of Mullen Way does not have any existing infrastructure. When infrastructure is constructed, normally it's built by the developer that develops the area, but because this area did not have that, when we construct the Mullen Way water main improvement, we'll form a reimbursement district. So what that means is the district will identify every parcel that will benefit from the water main and their proportionate share of the cost of the construction of it. Now, anyone who wants to tie into the water main for domestic water purposes would then pay their proportionate share of the water main as well as any impact fees or water connection fees. But if a property owner never connects to the water main, they would not pay their proportionate share. City reimbursement districts, unlike private reimbursement districts, do not have a sunset date. So if at any time in the future a parcel that's identified on the map when we adopt the district wants to connect to the water main, they would pay their proportionate share along with an inflationary rate that's added on an annual basis.
Okay, and it's totally voluntary.
It is. It's not a mandatory connection, but the fire protection would be there at the conclusion of the construction.
But do you anticipate most people will tie in?
That's sort of a crystal ball question, and I think a lot of that will depend on the actual cost.
Okay, but we will be running fire hydrants out there because that is a
yes, ma'am.
First line of defense on that side of Copper Basin. And
Tim will loan you his crystal ball.
and what about sewer? Because they're all on septic out there.
So we are exploring the possibility of septic. But we're still in the feasibility phase of that. We haven't determined whether that would be possible. A lot of that decision will be made based on whether off-site improvements would be needed. In other words, a lift station or something to that effect would dramatically increase the cost of a sewer system. So we're still in the feasibility design phase of that. So we don't really know yet if we're going to include sewer, but anytime we have the opportunity to add sewer where we have water, it's the time to do it.
Okay, all righty, thank you.
From Montoya.
Gwen, related to this reimbursement district, how does it work for the property owner when this happens? Do they have to come up with the cost of their proportionate share all at once, or is it stretched out, or is it added onto their bill? How does that work?
It's a Councilman Montoya, it's a one-time fee that they pay when they come and apply for a permit to install a water meter. And at that time, the city determines their share based on the inflationary rate. So obviously, it's a little cheaper.
So if they get it on the
earlier
ground floor,
it's a little cheaper if they get in earlier, but if they wait 10 years, it's going to be a little bit more. So we determine that amount, and then they pay that fee along with impact fees or other connection fees. And once those fees are paid, then we set a water meter.
okay, thank you.
Vacant properties? Right, so with a vacant parcel, so Mr. Couch is asking me to mention if there's a vacant parcel and they want to build a house, it would be the same process for them when they pull their building permit. They would pay their reimbursement district share as well as impact fees and connection fees.
Except that it would be required.
Yeah, I was going to say that shouldn't be.
Time of new construction would be
mandatory.
required.
Okay, thank you.
Once a water main fronts a parcel, they cannot get an exemption through the state to drill a well. So once the water main is there, any vacant parcels would have to mandatory connect.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
It's a good plan. Please proceed, Mr. Sherwood.
Thank you, sir. Our big ticket items as far as water is our water production projects. As you can see, we have almost $39 million. budgeted for FY23. The big ticket item there is the intermediate pump station water production facility. We've talked about that several times over the last few months. All the money for these projects has been encumbered, has been awarded by council. We are on GMP 6. Both projects are moving along well. As we've talked about several times, lead times and things like that have slowed us down. If standing here last year at this time, I think we thought we'd be further along than we are, but like I said, there's the lead times on pumps and electrical gear and stuff like that has slowed us down. Even recently, if you see the base for the tank on the right screen at the intermediate pump station, getting concrete has become an issue. Cement is a valuable commodity right now, and so we're not able to pour every time we want to pour. Sometimes it's got to be scheduled out a week, 10 days, until the concrete company can say, okay, well, you can get and there's several hundred yards in that base. So it's just another thing that's been kind of slows things down just a little bit. Any questions in regards to this project?
Nope.
Okay. Continuing on our water production projects, the Zone 56 tank, pipeline, and pump station. Actually, that should say Zone 56 tank, pipeline, and Zone 7 pump station. They are basically neighbors to each other, but their purpose is two different zones. That will go up behind the York Motors dealership in that area up on that hillside above Old Bullwhacker Hill. And that will come to you guys next Tuesday for construction award. The Chino Valley Production Well Number 3 rehabilitation is the site map you see in the lower right-hand corner. That well location is at Road 2 North and Road 1 East in Chino Valley, the same proximity as well number 4 and well number 5, which we have previously rehabilitated. The design for that is complete, and then we will start construction on that in October. We will be bringing the construction contract to you, council, in June, I believe June 14th. So we can start acquiring those long lead time items. It's not a well we want to take down during peak demand. We want to do it during off demand, so we typically rehab these wells in the fall and wintertime. And then the last project you see there is the Zone 52 water main to the Northwest Regional Tank. Northwest Regional Tank is located on the north side of Southview, near Pioneer Parkway and Williamson Valley Road. This water main will extend down Williamson Valley Road to the Longview subdivision. Currently, Longview is in Zone 51, has a single solitary feed. This will give them a much more reliable feed. We'll be able to eliminate a tank as well as a pump station by doing this project.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I have a question.
Sure.
Sometimes it's confusing when you talk about Zone 56, Zone 52. So I just like some clarification. This is the pump station and water production facility. Is this the one that is west of the airport, west of 89?
Yes.
And it's going to serve in the future growth and development in the north part in our growth corridor, plus the traditional part of Prescott.
Yes, it will still serve the greater city as a whole. It's just it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an intermediate stop. It reduces our pressures leaving Chino Valley, reduces the wear and tear on the system, the amount of power it requires us to get that water out of there. And then it also allows us to bring the zones out at the airport, the new airport wells, bring those into the system as well. But it'll serve the city as a whole as well as North Prescott.
So it looks here, the way you have it set up, that we're going to do 2 WIFA loans for 38 million.
We're doing a second WIFA loan. We have an initial WIFA loan for the first part of the project. And as we talked about, as costs have escalated, we've gone after a second WIFA loan. We are going to their board in June.
That's a pretty big number there.
Yes, it is.
And it's a 30-year, 1.5% on both of them.
No, wish it was.
No, the first loan is set, and it was 30 years and 1.6 or something. The second loan will be set when we close, so it'll be whatever the rates are at that time. So the closing, if we go to the board in June, the board approves, the closing will be in July or August. and it'll be set at whatever the market is at that time.
It's going to be rough.
Okay, a lot of debt there.
Yeah, we'll have that second Federal Open Market Committee.
Want to hit the next slide?
Yep.
Okay, so the last water project we're going to do this year is our Watson Lake improvements. Actually, this one has been a long time coming. We've been working on the total maximum daily load, or the TMDL issue at the lakes for probably close to a decade. The recommendation came out about 18 months ago to add aeration devices to the lake, as well as fish, to help control the aquatic weeds that have overrun the lake, and this will help with some of the impairments in the lake, specifically with dissolved oxygen. The staff has been working with the Fish and Game Department, and they're recommending that we stock the lake with white amur fish, otherwise known as a grass carp. I asked Matt Killeen, our environmental quality person, if people could fish for these fish in the lake. And he said, well, they can, Gwen, but they're vegetarians. So I guess that means they don't eat worms. They like to eat weeds or vegetation. So they can get quite big. According to Matt, they can be anywhere from 2 to 3 feet in size when they're full maturity. So we'll be working with Game and Fish, for the best time of year to stock them into the lake, but that's going to happen here in fiscal year 23 as well as the installation of the aeration devices.
Councilman Montoya?
So you bait the hook with like a blade of grass?
Put a carrot on it, or anything like that. They'll probably come
I'm kidding.
for it.
My question, Gwen, I guess, is what will the impact of users, like what is the desired impact of this for regular recreational users of this lake? What will they notice?
The goal is to, and I'm told it would be almost an immediate result, that it will reduce the aquatic weeds in the lake, which will improve safety for the boaters. It will reduce the likelihood of algae blooms forming in the lake, which is dangerous for wildlife and people. That's the goal, is to reduce the loads into the lake, specifically the weeds that are causing that.
So if my son falls out of a kayak, I don't have to worry about him
He's not
coming
going
out
to get tangled in the weeds. Yeah.
slimy necessarily.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's a little less slime on him when he comes out. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so 375.
Going to be part of the search and rescue team.
Not only the fish in the aeration, but there'll also be a dam. We haven't figured out what that's going to look like yet, but there'll be a dam so that the fish don't go over the spillway on the permanent dam. So we're working with Game and Fish on that too. What's the best thing for the wildlife?
So do you have an idea? Obviously, $375,000 is the start of this project essentially, but obviously there's some ongoing costs with maintenance of the aeration and we have to buy the fish presumably to stock them, right?
In the initial, yes, we have to buy the fish. We have to build the dam. There'll be some power needs for the aeration devices, and they'll have to be strategically located around the lake. So, yeah.
So there'll be some ongoing costs.
Some ongoing cost, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving on to our wastewater capital projects. We have our wastewater collection projects, as well as wastewater treatment. Our larger wastewater collection projects, we have a budget of $6.1 million this year in the wastewater fund, as well as WIFA loan. Is that correct? One of the bigger projects we're working on, and if you travel down Miller Valley Road, you'll see that, is Sundog Truck Main Phase C. We're currently doing Phase C2 right now. That project will be wrapped up by mid-June. Project we're just getting underway is the Ruger Road Sewer Main Extension, and that is the blue line you see in the right-hand corner that kind of goes east and west and then comes down and then goes off on an angle. And that was to accommodate the FedEx location. The old 10-inch main is the green line you see runs diagonally through that. But through our model, that line is severely undersized. It's only 10-inch. We're putting a 24-inch line in for future flows out there. And then the last one there is, and that project will be done in phases. It will be, the first phase is around the FedEx site. The second phase will be across the airport, and we've talked to Robin, and we'll work on that as part of the runway expansion. And then the other phase will be down Ruger Road to the, over towards the SR89 area, approximately where CP Tech is at. The last one is the Slaughterhouse Gulch Sewer Improvement Project. That's the picture you see on the right. That's our main trunk main from downtown right now, or the general Prescott area to the Sundog Treatment Plant. And as you can see by those two supports in the middle of the creek, we need to upgrade that. We don't want that pipe failing. We don't want something coming down the creek, hitting that support, and that pipe failing. So,
Tim, isn't that a project that's important to the tribe, too?
yes, sir, it is. Yes. So that project, the design has been done for some time. It's been at 100% for a little while now. It will be basically a freestanding, for lack of a better word, like a bridge-type structure that will have no support in the creek itself. So it won't be susceptible to debris flowing down the wash. We had a rain event there a few years ago where it got a little dicey. There was a lot of debris coming down that creek. The upstream, the old tunnel that used to go into the railroad grade got completely backed up by a container that had floated downstream. So if had that gotten through, it wouldn't have been good. Any questions here?
Mayor, if I may.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilman Montoya.
Don't give me the promotion. I don't want it. Tim, I know you and I have gone back and forth about the Sundog trunk main, because that's the construction that's ongoing right now, right?
That's one phase of it,
Yeah,
yes.
one phase, okay. So I know there's been some concern raised by some of the residents in that area about making sure that we're maintaining the riparian area of that creek area. And then the last we had talked, you were kind of trying to wait to hear back from Michael Bird at Prescott Creeks. I just want to know have you made progress with that?
Yes, we have. Michael has given us kind of an approved plant list. I think we're very close now to meeting internally as staff and kind of finalizing that, and then we'll schedule a public meeting with that group out there.
All right, and then I assume that because what phase is that we're in with that?
That's part of C2. So
Okay.
C2 was essentially from the bridge on Miller Valley. I can't think of the name of the bridge, but it's right there near the McDonald's and that
Yeah,
area.
I know where you're
along
talking
C2, and then we did phase C1 as part of the apartment complex when it went in, and then the other piece of C2 was from basically the apartment complex through the Lincoln Low Water Crossing.
So the work with Michael Bird and Prescott Creeks will, I imagine, be incorporated into the remainder of the process?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to our wastewater treatment projects, we have $1.4 million budgeted for this year. Primarily, a lot of the work we're doing is towards centralization. Top one is the effluent tank pipeline and SR89 widening. Our goal for this year is public outreach. So we are developing a website that will be interactive with the public, wanting to get, it is a Prescott project, but it has a regional component to it. As a project manager for when we did the widening in the Fippen roundabout, it's like I said, it's a Prescott project, but there's a lot of people that use that don't live in Prescott. So like I said, our goal for this year is to continue the public outreach, get the ideas and opinions of the people that live in the area and have to deal with the traffic that comes through that corridor now. But as a big component of this project is the new effluent tank and the new effluent line that has to go through that corridor as well for part of our centralization project out at the airport water reclamation facility. The other component of that is the Sundog Equalization Basin, which will be a key component decommissioning the Sundog plant as we move forward. Any questions?
Yeah, tell me more about the plans for SR89 widening.
Well, I don't have any plans like right now. Like I said, what we want to do is, like I said, get input from the community. I think as we've talked, when I talked with our previous director, stuff like that, it's not, one of the key components, like I said, we've got a 24-inch Amaron pipe in that corridor that has failed 3 times since we paved the project. Right. So we need to reline that pipe, but we need to put the effluent pipeline in first. That'll be a new pipe. And then we'll reline the other one, and then we'll be able to move effluent as well as raw sewage out to the airport reclamation facility, water reclamation facility.
So we're going to try to do that in conjunction with the widening of the Narrows.
Yes, sir. It would be much like a Penn Eastwood project where we'll have a utility component and a roadway component.
Well, I know that was in the, the 5 or 10-year plan, is to get that Narrows widening design planned, and I was hoping that we would be moving forward with that a little more rapidly than currently seems like we're planning.
So Mayor, the widening of SR 89 is part of the city's infrastructure improvement plan.
Right.
We collect development impact fees for that project. So we have to construct it within 10 years.
Right.
But we do have to replace the effluent pipeline first. That has to occur first. But as Tim mentioned, we're anticipating a large amount of public input. So we will request qualifications for a design consultant who will develop a 15% conceptual plan for the project, which will include the widening. And then we'll proceed with designing the effluent pipeline as we gather public input on the widening of the corridor, because the visual part and the traffic flow is going to be the most important thing that affects the community. But as a city, we have to look at all of the components. So we need to get the effluent pipeline part moving forward first, and we feel that we can do that concurrently with the public outreach on the widening that's going to affect the community. So at this time, our plan is to get community input, start the design of the effluent pipeline in fiscal year 23, and then as we move into fiscal year 24, we'll be designing the road, and we'll probably be building it in late 24, early 25, because we adopted the development impact fee in 2018, so we need to spend it by 2028.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was that the Narrows had a capacity of about 18,000 vehicles per day. And a couple of years ago, we were around 15. So we were only 20% away from hitting capacity there, and then starting to have vehicle backup into the roundabout, and then other people trying to figure out a way around the congestion that would just loads up more of the traffic going through Willow Lake Road and Willow Creek Road. In addition to the other attempts to find other ways around. It just pushes the problems into other areas.
Yeah, and that, obviously the widening, we mentioned the CYMPO, Central Yavapai Metropolitan Transportation Organization, transportation study. Obviously the widening of the Dells was a major project identified in the medium term, long term. It's still working within its capacity and will continue to. It will operate. It will just have more delay. And if you actually drive that corridor currently, it's fine in the middle of the day and off peak hours. You kind of get a backup at the roundabouts during the peak hour. But I mean, these steps have to be taken with the water system, and so we're making progress towards that goal. And but it will be a 4-lane roadway through there. I mean, it will resolve those congestion issues.
I just hope we don't get into analysis paralysis, and then finally we have such a huge traffic problem. Then addressing it at that time just makes the solution even more impactful and costly, and I think the driving public at large is going to be even more, shall I say, angry when they finally start to see that it's going to get done. So I think the sooner the better, but I understand the cost and planning parts of it. I mean, if we can't get SIMPO to put an extra on-ramp lane for 5 years, when are they going to get around to actually helping us to get this thing done?
I have a comment.
Mayor Pro Tem.
What's the cost going to be putting a 4-lane highway through that very granite part of the Dells? Does anyone have a number for that?
Mark could guess.
No, we don't really have a
Crystal ball?
I was going to say that's
Tim,
might revolve a
I
crystal
think
ball.
we're talking to you. Well, it's
mean-
certainly substantial.
It's in a portion of the costs, I think, that we had identified. I think it's identified in there. One of the things is preliminary, we've only looked at it preliminarily as staff, but the actual amount of blasting and actual granite that you have to go through is actually much less than I think we imagine, because there's actually a lot of, we've measured it out, and there's just, the main pinch point is about where the park entrance comes at the old 89A, where you're by the old bar, and then just south of, I'll call it the plumbing house, the old, Granite Dells Ranch Road or whatever it is, and you get the plumbing. You might have to move back and forth, but that's your main pinch point, and so there is opportunity for it, and we have quite a bit of right-of-way in there as well,
How
which
many
is going to
linear miles are we talking?
of actual, where we have to like take rock down and stuff.
Well, I mean, the project, how many miles of the road are we talking about improving?
We had that listed in the project detail sheet.
I think it's 1.8.
Yeah.
1.8?
Not a lot.
It's not very far, actually. Yeah, and so it's less impactful than I think we all imagine, but we did come up with some type of cost estimate. We just obviously are having a little issue finding it, but we can get that for you.
And the funding will come from the road tax or
Streets.
or?
It's part of was part of the IIP, so part of it will come from impact fees, which are being collected out in that area. Part of it will be from the road tax. It's a regional road. Part of it should be from our friends at the county as well. I mean, it's not all Prescott citizens that drive that. It's Chino Valley.
Roundabout by there, so.
We'll give them $1 million for that if they give
They
us
have a short
10 for
memory.
the.
Okay, it just sounds like,
Montoya.
Can we ask them for, can we give them $1 million and just say, hey, give it back to us when we do the expansion? Seriously question though, so the blasting, are there any concerns about impacts to, I know the areas that you're talking about, Ian, I guess, is there any concern about impacts of people who live in that area?
Yeah, let's try to avoid the term blasting.
Yeah.
Modern techniques there use drilling and expansive chemicals so that the granite can be shaved and cleaved without blasting.
Okay,
so we don't have Wile E. Coyote and Acme Dynamite Company here, but that's what we want to avoid because some people in the public see it that way, and they're concerned about some of the granite boulders that are up on the side. So let's try to use
I appreciate that clarification because
descriptions.
Mayor, because in my mind, I was picturing Wile E. Coyote there with a stick of dynamite, so I appreciate that.
Rock removal techniques have evolved, and we would not necessarily direct the contractor exactly what they want to do. There's rock saws, there's a product that you can insert, you can drill into a hole and it'll pop as it expands, depending on the hardness of the rock. Certain rocks are hard that a lot of other techniques don't work, but there's a lot of options in that corridor. And as Ian said, I don't think it's going to be as, we've looked at it quite a bit over the last couple of years, and I don't think it's going to be as bad as we think it might be.
Well,
or other people might think it might be.
Other people.
I'd just like to comment that it's going to be a big expenditure, maybe, 40 million, something like that.
Wait, I
Who
have the
knows?
number.
Oh, you do?
I found
Okay.
it. Sorry, it just took me a minute.
Yeah,
Not
that
quite
was my
that big.
guess.
It's 26 million is the estimate.
26
But
million.
that includes the tank, the pipeline, and the road widening. And my personal estimation is that the road is probably around 17 or 18 million, and the rest is tank and pipeline.
And when was the estimate done?
About a year ago, so it could be a third more than that now.
So maybe 30 million?
Maybe.
And, I'm glad we're going to have some public input about this because this is going to be a very controversial, emotional-laden debate. And I think maybe the public will have to decide, do they want to spend the money to save 5 minutes? Or is it worth a scenic drive through the Dells as it is now that might take them 5 minutes longer?
Thank you, Gwen, and thank you, Tim. And thank you, Mr. Sherwood.
And I'll let Ian talk about our next slide.
Yep, so
Are we done yet?
just to touch on some new facilities. So in the budget includes monies for new streets division snow equipment facilities. This will be located at the existing Sundog Ranch wastewater facilities plant. There were some sludge beds as the plant decommission continues, and we move the plant out to the airport with a lot of these projects. We've taken initial steps to relocate the existing spreader racks, all the equipment for the snow removal that's over at the transfer station. We've already done some prep work for that, but we will be constructing spreader racks eventually to be covered, and it goes along with future relocation of the streets division to that facility as that is decommissioned. Along with that, we also have budgeted some money for an additional scale and fee booth. With the increasing traffic at the transfer station, we're looking at ideas for how we can interimly, we need to master plan and do some things at that transfer station site as we grow, but we've budgeted some money so that we can take intermediate action if we need to place an additional scale and fee booth in a different location, more near the inert pile and the brush pile, so that we can improve customer service in the short to medium term. That adds up to about $1.6 million in fiscal year 23. Just want to touch on that so you know. Any questions? Thank you.
Okay, and the last slide, I promise it's the last one for Public Works, is vehicle replacements. We're a big department with 162 employees. We use a lot of different types of vehicles and equipment. The number you see on your screen, approximately a little over $2 million of that is carryover from this current fiscal year for 17 different vehicles that have been ordered but not received yet. For fiscal year 23, we are requesting 3 trash trucks, 2 side loads and 1 front load. Those are replacement vehicles that were contemplated as part of the rate study. In addition to that, there'll be 9 new pickup trucks for various divisions, a dump truck for streets. Their dump truck is currently over 25 years old. A backhoe, as well as a skid steer, a concrete mixer for smaller jobs, and a golf cart for the wastewater treatment plant. Any questions about vehicles? Okay.
So just wrapping up the Public Works capital, as you can see, $80.4 million in this coming year, $304 million over the next 5 years, 6 years there. And I did look up the street tax, and I'm not totally losing it. Yes, it sunsets in December of 2035. Any questions on the last slide of the capital? If not, we'll look at the remaining calendar. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I would just like to comment that the 80 million expenditure, Public Works, we have to remember that infrastructure is the backbone of what we do here. And I think that it's always money well spent. Thank you.
So upcoming steps for the budget process, we can do another budget workshop, and we can go through the same slides, we can go through different slides, whatever council would like to do on May 31st, or if you feel you have enough information to move into the hearing process, which would start on June 14th with the tentative adoption, where we bring the tentative budget to you. The budget cannot be increased over that tentative budget. It can be reduced between that and the final. Then on the 28th, we would have the public hearing to adopt the budget and alternative expenditure limit, and followed by the property tax levy, which has to be done on 2 weeks after that hearing on July 12th. With that, if you want to meet on the 31st, I'd appreciate a little direction as to what you'd like to talk about.
Is that Memorial Day weekend?
Mayor Pro Tem.
No, it's a Tuesday.
Okay. The day
After Memorial Day
The
weekend.
day after, okay. I'd like to have a second one, and maybe we get some more public input. That's just my personal feeling.
I'd like to keep our lines of communication open between now and then to get any public input that we could gather, but I feel like we've been able to ask tons of questions today and receive a lot of good information, so personally, I don't feel the need for another meeting of this nature.
Well, plus, we've had 2 council members were absent for it. I was kind of concerned.
That was going to be my only suggestion, is that we've covered a lot of ground. It would be, if I were Councilman Moore or Councilwoman Hall, I would have a hard time adopting the budget without having gone through all this information, which is why I asked so many questions. So for their benefit, it may be useful for them to meet with you or the finance department one-on-one, but
We would be very happy to
Yes.
meet with them individually or the 2 of them together. It wouldn't violate.
Or anybody from the public. Again, that's why our phone number was on the first couple
Right.
slides.
I mean,
So-
for my benefit, I don't see the need of doing another public meeting like this. I think that I'll probably bug Mark with a bunch of more questions through email, which he will reply to, I'm sure, and then we'll, I feel satisfied with the due diligence we've done here today.
Well, I think we have consensus here that we probably don't need another meeting of this nature for the workshop. But once Councilman Moore and Councilwoman Hall decide they might want to have some additional briefing information, they can reach out individually.
Of course.
Absolutely. And we hopefully will have an answer on our fire grants and have a proposal or solution if we do not get those by the 14th. So we'll cover that as part of that tentative budget adoption, if anything comes up there.
And maybe with the supply chain problems out there in the Pacific Coast, Long Beach, the crystal ball will be delivered in time.
Certainly.
You think the supply chain issues will be wrapped up by about May 31st? Gives you a couple of weeks.
Okay.
All right, anything else? Well, then this workshop is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Yes.